Chapter 1. The Broken Inkstand. The rain fell in a steady drizzle over London's grey rooftops as Hercule Poirot stepped from the hansom cab onto the polished stones of Belgrave Square. His little black moustache quivered with anticipation. The evening's invitation held an inscrutable promise. He adjusted the lapels of his tailored frock-coat and surveyed the grand facade of Ashbornne House. Soft gaslights glowed behind tall sash windows, promising warmth and conversation, though Poirot suspected perhaps not all of it congenial. He rang the ornate brass bell, its single chime echoing across the marble-floored entrance hall. A footman in livery answered, his composure flawless, but eyes alert. "Monsieur Poirot?" the man asked, dipping into a polite bow. "Lady Ashbourne awaits you in the drawing-room." "Ah, très bien," Poirot replied. "I trust all is well." The footman pressed his lips into a polite line. "Lady Ashbourne has requested your assistance with a delicate matter. She will explain herself." Poirot followed through an archway hung with crimson damask, his eyes taking in every detail: the gleaming parquet, the arrangement of oil paintings, the subtle hint of lavender in the air. At the far end, a tall woman in evening dress stood before an ebony writing desk. Her back was turned, slender fingers tracing the carved edges of what remained of a once elegant object. "Madam," Poirot said softly, removing his bowler hat, "merci for your invitation." Lady Ashbourne turned. Her expression was composed but shadowed by concern. She was a woman of refined bearing, perhaps in her early 50s, with silver-streaked chestnut hair swept up in an intricate coiffure. Pearls at her throat matched the cool gleam in her eyes. She gestured to a small pair of yellow silk cushions laid on the desk. Between them lay the broken remnants of a carved crystal inkstand, its central reservoir shattered, shards scattered like icy tears. "Mr. Poirot," she said, voice calm but tight. "Thank you for coming. My husband, Lord Ashbourne, sent for you at once when this transpired." "I see," Poirot murmured, kneeling to examine the fragments. "What a tragedy! A most precious object, I presume." Lady Ashbourne inclined her head. "It has been in the family for generations. My husband prizes it above all else. He was due to present it tonight at a private gathering of collectors." She paused, glancing at her own gloved fingers. "He discovered it like this upon returning from his study less than an hour ago." Poirot said, lifting a slender shard with his gloved thumb and forefinger. He turned it in the lamplight. "Notice these fine striations, almost like the mark of a sharp implement pressed against the crystal. And here," he tapped another piece, "a small fleck of crimson." Lady Ashbourne caught her breath. Blood? Perhaps, but of what origin? Poirot stood, pocketing the shard in a velvet-lined case, his keen grey eyes fixed on the assembled company. "Madame, might I ask who else was in the house this evening? My husband has 5 guests for dinner. Colonel Fitzroy, the novelist Miss Violet Carstairs, Sir Rupert Mallory, Mr. Edwin Harris, and our close friend Dr. Eleanor Grant." She paused. "And, of course, the household staff. My lady's maid, Mrs. Pender, the butler, Mr. Arnold, and 2 footmen." Poirot straightened his shoulders. "Très bien. I shall need to speak with each of them. But first, I must know exactly what transpired when Lord Ashbourne found the inkstand." Lady Ashbourne led him to the study, a room dominated by floor-to-ceiling bookcases and a heavy mahogany desk. The great window looked out onto the slick cobbles of the courtyard, where rainwater glistened. 2 armchairs faced the desk, their leather cushions bearing indentations from recent use. "My husband was seated here," she said, pointing to the larger of the chairs. "He writes by candlelight most evenings. He left only to fetch a fresh quill from the writing desk in the hall, asking Mrs. Pender to bring it. When he returned, well, he found the inkstand shattered, and drops of liquid staining the inkwells and blotter." Poirot studied the blotter. A square of heavy linen, the edges frayed, tiny bloodstains marred its surface. His moustache twitched. "Madame, did Lord Ashbourne cut himself at all?" She said she saw no wound when he returned. Lady Ashbourne's voice was steady. He brushed his hand against a shard accidentally, cutting his palm. Mrs. Pender assisted him, but the damage to the inkstand was already done. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And did anyone hear the crash? The sound of breaking crystal?" Lady Ashbourne hesitated. "I heard a thud, but the 8 drawing-room chairs squeaked, and the piano in the next room played a note. Miss Carstairs practising, I believe. It may have masked the noise. Très bien." Poirot's eyes drifted to a corner where the piano rested. "Miss Carstairs, you say? A pianist as well as a novelist?" Lady Ashbourne offered a ghost of a smile. "She is, yes, a remarkable talent, but she is not the issue at present. No, but every detail must be noted." Poirot placed a hand on the desk. "Monsieur le Comte." He paused, correcting himself. "Lord Ashbourne must think this an accident. Yet I suspect otherwise." Lady Ashbourne's brow furrowed. "You believe someone did this deliberately?" "Possible. The inkstand was more than just stationery. It held secrets." Poirot eyed the desk drawers. "Perhaps Lady Ashbourne would allow me to inspect its contents." The lady led him back to the drawing-room, where she produced a small leather portfolio from a secretaire. Inside lay letters tied with ribbon, sealed envelopes, and a stack of unfinished manuscripts. These belonged entirely to my husband. Poirot rummaged gently, lifting a folded letter addressed to E.G. in elegant script. He inspected the seal, broken, but not tampered with violently. "To E.G.," he repeated. "Strange." He looked up. "Madame, may I ask who E.G. might be?" Lady Ashbourne stiffened. "I do not know. Lord Ashbourne does not discuss his private correspondences with me in detail." "Ah." Poirot closed the portfolio. "We must learn more. If the inkstand was broken to destroy something, letters perhaps, it suggests someone wished their contents unread." A hush fell. The patter of rain on the windows filled the silence. Poirot turned to Lady Ashbourne with a solemn air. "Madam, I must question your guests and your staff. Each may hold a piece of this puzzle of the broken inkstand." She nodded. "Of course, do what you must, Monsieur Poirot." He rose, buttoning his coat. "And one more thing, Madame, do you keep any duplicate keys for this desk?" She took a small keyring from her pocket and handed it over. 5 keys of varying sizes. Poirot selected one slender key and examined it. "I shall return it when I am done." As he stepped toward the doorway, the little grey cells whirring with hypotheses, a distant clock struck 9. Outside, the rain intensified. Within the grand house, a more sinister storm was gathering, one of secrets, suspicion, and perhaps murder. Poirot's eyes gleamed with determination. The game, as always, was afoot. Chapter 2. Whispers Behind Closed Doors. Hercule Poirot paused a moment in the entrance hall, listening intently to the fading echoes of Lady Ashbourne's footsteps as she departed to assemble her guests. The hush of the corridor, broken only by the drip of rain seeping through the eaves, seemed to harbour its own secrets. Poirot smoothed his frock coat, took a breath of the cool, lavender-scented air, and prepared to unravel the web of intrigue that had already begun to ensnare Ashbornne House. He decided to begin with the household staff, whose familiarity with every creak of floorboard and flicker of candlelight made them the first guardians of untold truths. Turning down the side passage, he approached the servants' quarters. A heavy oaken door bore the discreet inscription, "Staff Only," in gilt letters. He knocked discreetly. "Enter," called a soft voice. Inside stood Mrs. Pender, the lady's maid, a demure middle-aged woman with a prim bun and gentle eyes that nevertheless flickered with anxiety. She curtsied politely. "Monsieur Poirot, Madame Pender," Poirot interrupted kindly. "I wish only a few questions. Pray, do not be nervous. You have already aided Lady Ashbourne admirably." The maid's lips trembled faintly. "I shall do my best, sir. First, tell me of the moment you were called to the study." Poirot produced a small notebook. "What precisely did you see?" Mrs. Pender clasped her hands. "I heard Lord Ashbourne cry out as he returned. I hurried in with a fresh quill, as he had requested. I saw him clutch his hand, blood upon his palm, and the inkstand shattered upon the desk. I knelt to offer first aid. And did you notice anyone else present?" Poirot's grey eyes were gentle but insistent. "No one, monsieur." She swallowed. "But I thought I heard hurried footsteps on the landing above, almost as if someone fled the room." "On the upper corridor?" Poirot asked, arching an eyebrow. "Yes. It was faint, but the hardwood there creaks differently than here." She paused. "I took the quill and returned swiftly. I did not think at the time to look further." Poirot closed his notebook. "Très bien. And have you any idea why someone might wish to break the inkstand?" Mrs. Pender shook her head. "It is so peculiar. Lord Ashbourne treasures that inkstand more than anything. He used it for his most private letters." "Thank you, madame. You may rest." Poirot inclined his head and departed, stepping lightly back into the corridor. He noted two things: the maid's genuine distress, and her mention of a flight of stairs. A promising lead. Next, he would speak with the butler, Mr. Arnold, whose stern countenance and impeccable demeanour often masked a mind as observant as Poirot's own. The butler awaited him in the panelled breakfast-room, arms folded behind his back. "Monsieur Poirot," he said with quiet formality. "Mr. Arnold," Poirot replied, "I wish to know of any unusual occurrences this evening. Did you note anything amiss?" Arnold's posture remained rigid. "Nothing beyond the usual, sir. Guests arrived punctually. Tea was served in the Aix-en-Ville drawing-room. Dinner followed schedule. No sounds of breaking crystal reached me. I was attending Colonel Fitzroy in the library." "The library?" Poirot tilted his head. "Pray, describe the Colonel's state when you left him." Arnold frowned slightly. "Colonel Fitzroy was agitated, more so than usual. He paused. He had requested a brandy, and paced beside the fireplace, muttering under his breath. "And did he come to the study?" Poirot pressed. "No, sir. He remained in the library until summoned to dinner." Poirot noted this carefully. The Colonel's agitation might bear relevance, yet his alibi was solid, relying on the testimony of 2 footmen. He thanked Arnold and moved on, ascending the grand staircase to interview Colonel Fitzroy himself. The Colonel's suite overlooked the courtyard, its tall window framing the rain-slicked cobbles. He sat in a wing-back chair, sleeve rolled up to reveal a thin scar upon his wrist. His uniform was immaculate, but his face was flushed. "Colonel," Poirot began, taking a seat across from him, "you were discovered pacing your library. Tell me why the agitation?" The Colonel's moustache bristled. "It is personal, Poirot, a family matter brought to mind tonight's gathering. But I assure you, I had nothing to do with that unfortunate incident in the study." "Of course," Poirot soothed. "Yet you were on this floor when the inkstand was broken." "I was on the lower floor, sir. The library corridor is 1 level down. I heard a crash, but assumed it was thunder striking the roof." He gestured outside. "This storm is violent." "Indeed," Poirot said, smiling. "But thunder does not shatter crystal. When did you hear the sound?" "Just before 8. The Colonel frowned. "I was taking a moment's respite before dinner." "A sharp mind deserves rest," Poirot agreed. "But pray, did you see anyone retreat from the direction of the study?" The Colonel hesitated, then shook his head. "No, sir, only shadows. Perhaps just my imagination." Poirot allowed the Colonel a moment's reprieve, then took his leave. He had gathered fragments, footsteps above, a nervous maid, an aloof butler, and an agitated Colonel. Now, time to question the guests themselves. He proceeded to the drawing-room, where the 5 were assembled as if on display. Miss Violet Carstairs, poised at the piano, looked up as Poirot entered. Sir Rupert Mallory lounged in an armchair, cigar between his fingers. Mr. Edwin Harris stood by the window, peering into the rain. Dr. Eleanor Grant sat in a corner, pale blue shawl draped neatly around her shoulders. "Monsieur Poirot, Lady," Ashborne said, ushering him forward. "Shall we begin?" "Merci, madame." Poirot addressed them in turn, beginning with Miss Carstairs. "You were practising on the piano when the crash occurred. Can you confirm the time?" She raised a slender hand. I paused at the first few notes of Chopin's Nocturne, perhaps 7:50. I heard a distant thud, but continued playing until the maid summoned me for dinner. "And did you see anyone near the study?" Poirot asked. Miss Carstairs shook her head. "No, sir. Only I recall seeing Dr. Grant leave the drawing-room, heading toward the conservatory." "Ah," Poirot said, narrowing his eyes. "Dr. Grant, did you indeed visit the conservatory?" The doctor inclined her head. "Yes, a moment's breath of air. The jasmine out there soothes my nerves." She smiled wanly. "I find perfume calming." "Understandable." Poirot turned to Sir Rupert. "And you, sir? Where were you when the inkstand shattered?" Sir Rupert stubbed out his cigar. "I was finishing a correspondence in the dining-room. The butler can confirm." He chuckled. "Nothing more dramatic than a dropped spoon." Poirot nodded, scanning Mr. Harris, who still gazed at the courtyard. "And you, Mr. Harris?" Mr. Harris turned, adjusting his spectacles. "I was inspecting the ornamental fountain outside. taking notes for my article on Victorian garden design." He tapped a leather-bound notebook. I heard voices muffled by the window, but I could not distinguish their source. Poirot's gaze flicked among them. Each held an alibi supported by routine movements and by one another. Yet something nagged at his little grey cells. The broken inkstand, the fleck of blood, the possibility of secret correspondence. These clues hinted at a purpose beyond accident. "Thank you, mes amis," Poirot said, bowing slightly. "Your cooperation is most appreciated. I believe one of you, or perhaps one of the staff, may know more than you admit. But rest assured, I shall uncover the truth." He excused himself to retire once more to the study, where the fractured crystal lay like the pieces of a broken heart. There, amid the scattered letters and the blood-stained blotter, Poirot would marshal his thoughts. Each whispered confession, every furtive glance, and the tread of muted footsteps would form the outline of the culprit. As he locked the study, daughter behind him, the storm outside beat against the windows like impatient fingers. Inside, the quiet crackle of the fireplace welcomed him. The next move belonged to Poirot's careful mind, and to the shadows that whispered of secrets yet to be revealed. Chapter 3. Echoes of a Hidden Chamber. Hercule Poirot sat alone in the study, the soft crackle of the fire his only companion. Its eyes traced the jagged edges of the fractured crystal inkstand, while his little grey cells sifted through the impressions gleaned from each interview. He retrieved the velvet-lined case from his pocket and gently placed the shard he had taken earlier back among its fellows. Carefully, he rearranged the fragments, noting how the pattern of breakage suggested force exerted from below rather than a simple knock, an intentional strike, perhaps driven by desperation or fear. Drawing a polished magnifying glass from his waistcoat, Poirot examined the largest shard in greater detail. Tiny flecks of red marred the surface, yet the blotter bore only a few isolated stains. This suggested that the breaking and the bleeding were separate events, or that the culprit had made a meticulous effort to conceal deeper wounds. He tapped a shard lightly against the blotter. No fresh blood transferred. Whoever had cut themselves had likely wiped clean afterwards, or the laceration was superficial. Yet the possibility remained. Blood had been shed in the study, and someone carried its trace. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. The letters addressed to E.G. nagged at him. The initials matched Dr. Eleanor Grant's, yet Lady Ashbourne insisted ignorance of her husband's private correspondences. Why would Lord Ashbourne send letters to his friend, and why break his treasured inkstand to shatter and perhaps destroy those messages? Perhaps a third party intercepted them, or was E.G. herself implicated? Poirot resolved to investigate the correspondence directly. He rose, retrieving the leather portfolio from the drawing-room, and carried it to the firelight. One by one he unfolded the envelopes, inhaling the faint scent of lavender and jasmines which lingered on the paper. The first letter was dated 3 weeks prior, sealed with a crest mark that matched the Ashbourne family arms. The contents, though private, bore the tone of a confidant. Apologetic phrasing, mentions of a personal difficulty, and a request for counsel. He glanced at the signature. Ever yours, R.A., Lord Ashbourne himself. The reply, scrawled in a neat hand and dated 4 days later, offered comfort, suggested a meeting at the conservatory pavilion, and hinted at matters best discussed in solitude. Poirot's brow furrowed. A secret rendezvous between Lord and Doctor, away from prying eyes, perhaps explained the excursion Dr. Grant made earlier. But why would that secret merit the destruction of the inkstand? He replaced the letters and strode from the study toward the conservatory, determined to inspect the scene of those clandestine meetings. The marble-floored hall leading to the conservatory was hushed and dim, lit only by wall sconces reflecting off damp glass. The air carried a heady, sweet fragrance, Jasminum officinale, and perhaps a hint of garden soil stirred by raindrops. Dr. Grant had claimed respite among the blooms. Poirot would seek whatever evidence remained. Inside the conservatory proper, large glass panels revealed the storm-darkened garden beyond. A wrought-iron bench sat beneath a trellis, heavy with flowering vines, their petals trembling under the downpour. The polished stone floor bore footprints, one set small and narrow, consistent with a lady's slipper, another broader and deeper, possibly Lord Ashbourne's sturdy heels. Poirot knelt to inspect the prints. The impressions suggested that the bench had been moved slightly, as if someone had slid it to create a private alcove. There, on the stone ledge beside the bench, lay a single scrap of paper, torn, damp, and nearly illegible. He retrieved it with a sterile handkerchief, pressed it to his lips, and read the remaining words. "To meet me at midnight. No witnesses. Trust only." The ink was smudged, obscuring the final name. Midnight? But the gathering tonight was in progress. Lord Ashbourne would not risk venturing into the conservatory at that hour, unless the note was intended for someone else, someone willing to enter the garden under cover of darkness. Poirot folded the fragment and placed it in his notebook. A whisper of movement drew his attention. Through the misted glass panes, he saw the silhouetted figure of Mr. Edwin Harris standing among potted palms, his back rigid. Poirot approached calmly. "Monsieur Harris, I trust I do not startle you." Mr. Harris blinked, stepping into the lamplight. His notebook was slotted under his arm, rain droplets beading on his sleeve. "Not at all, Monsieur Poirot." He cleared his throat. "I was merely admiring the structure of this conservatory. The craftsmanship is exquisite." "Indeed," Poirot agreed. "But pray, how often do you visit here tonight?" Harris hesitated. "This is my first time. I ventured in after dinner for a breath of fresh air. The storm seemed oppressive indoors. And did you notice anyone egressing here before you arrived?" Poirot asked. Harris shook his head. "No one, though I thought I heard a key turn in the greenhouse door just before the rain began to fall harder." "A key?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Madame Ashbourne produced several keys earlier. One of them opened this door. I shall need to know who holds duplicates." "Very well," Harris said, frowning. "I did not mean to imply anything. Forgive me." Poirot inclined his head. "Nothing to forgive. Your candour is appreciated." He pocketed the scrap of note and bid Harris good evening, leaving the man staring after him as he made his way back to the house. Once inside, Poirot returned to the drawing-room where Lady Ashbourne awaited him anxiously. He produced the note fragment. "Madame, do you recognize this handwriting?" She took the damp paper and examined it under the chandelier's glow. "It is not mine. But look, She pointed to a curling flourish. This stroke at the end of the word reminds me of Dr. Grant's signature on a document I once saw. Poirot nodded. I suspected as much. That note speaks of a meeting at midnight, yet Lord Ashbourne's schedule would not permit such a rendezvous. Perhaps it was intended for someone else, someone secretly involved in matters of the heart or business. He allowed the implication to hang between them. How perilous, Lady Ashbourne whispered. To meet in the garden at such a late hour, in this storm. Perilous indeed, Poirot agreed. And yet someone planned it. Someone who had access to your husband's keys and who knew of his habit of writing by candlelight. He turned the scrap over thoughtfully. We must question Dr. Grant further, particularly about this midnight appointment. Lady Ashbourne shivered and closed her shawl. She retires early, as I recall. She would not be wandering the grounds at that hour. Perhaps she was summoned by a message like this, and complied willingly. Poirot's voice was quiet but firm. Madame, would you grant me leave to speak with Dr. Grant again, separately from the others? Of course. Lady Ashbourne rose and led him toward the door where Dr. Grant had her rooms. They found the doctor arranging vials of fragrance on her dressing table. She turned, surprised, to see Poirot. Monsieur, she said, her tone civil but guarded. Dr. Grant, Poirot said, I have discovered this fragment tucked in the conservatory. He handed her the scrap. Would you care to explain its significance? The doctor's face paled. She took the paper with trembling fingers, smoothing it against her skirt. This is private. It was never meant to be seen. For whom was it meant? Poirot asked gently. And why mention midnight? Dr. Grant drew in a sharp breath. I confess. I met Lord Ashbourne 3 times under the pavilioned trellis. He sought my advice on a matter that tormented him, albeit error he feared would ruin him. She paused, tears gleaming. He feared exposure of a wager with Colonel Fitzroy that had gone awry. It involved sensitive information about a business enterprise, the very enterprise Colonel Fitzroy invested in. Poirot's eyebrows rose. A motive bloomed, letters revealing a compromising bet, the inkstand shattered to destroy evidence, yet the blood. And the wager, he pressed, can it be undone? Dr. Grant shook her head. He begged me to destroy the letters. He brought them each midnight, under cover of darkness. I must have left this reminder. Her voice faltered. I loved him, Monsieur Poirot. I thought I helped. A heavy silence fell. Poirot took her hand and gently squeezed. Madame, your honesty is commendable. Yet the inkstand was shattered before the blood spilled. Someone else intended greater harm, perhaps to intimidate. We must proceed carefully. He stepped away, determination in his stride. The revelation of a midnight assignation and a concealed wager gave clarity to many shadows. As Dr. Grant watched him leave, her face awash with guilt and fear, Poirot's mind raced. The stage was set for confrontation, a financial scandal, a broken friendship, and shattered crystal. Soon each piece would find its place, and the truth behind the puzzle of the broken inkstand would shine clear. Chapter 4. Secrets. Beneath the writing desk, the hush of late evening settled over Ashbornne House like a velvet blanket. Lightning flickered beyond the tall windows of the study, illuminating the grand room in flashes of ghostly white. Hercule Poirot closed the door gently behind him and paused, letting his keen senses drink in the details once more. The broken inkstand lay before him on the blotter-stained desk, crystals scattered like fallen tears. The tremor of the distant thunder echoed his own anticipation. The little grey cells were on the brink of discovery. He approached the desk and turned toward the bookshelves that lined the walls. These shelves, Lord Ashbourne's pride, held first editions, rare bindings, and leather volumes of accounts and correspondence. Yet what Poirot sought was subtle, a hidden compartment, a secret lock. He ran a gloved fingertip along the edge of the green baize lining the desk's interior. There, an almost imperceptible seam. Kneeling, Poirot pressed against the underside of the desktop in one corner. A soft click sounded. He smiled. Excellent, n'est-ce pas? He reached into the shelf and withdrew a slender, ivory-handled tool he had borrowed earlier from Lady Ashbourne's collection of letter-openers. With deft precision, he slipped it between the desk's panels and levered gently. A section of the woodwork gave way, revealing a narrow slot within. From the secret recess he extracted a small bundle of papers, tied with black ribbon. He unwrapped it and discovered several letters bearing Lord Ashbourne's handwriting, and others in a neat, feminine hand. He scanned the return addresses, one set to E.G. and another to V.C. Poirot's eyes glittered. Violet Carstairs, Miss Carstairs, the novelist and pianist. The letters to V.C. were dated only days ago, urging secrecy and referencing our understanding. His heart quickened. A second clandestine relationship, or a ruse to mislead. He tucked the letters into his notebook and studied them more closely. Phrases of ardent admiration, promises to meet in the library's alcove at dusk, entreaties to preserve discretion. The library alcove, where Colonel Fitzroy claimed he heard nothing. It all connected. He rose and crossed to the library door, pausing to glance at the clock mounted above the fireplace. It chimed 10:30. The dinner guests were dispersed throughout the house, some to the drawing-room, others to their chambers. Now was the moment to confront the one whose letters lay exposed. Locking the study door behind him, Poirot made his way down the corridor toward the library. The corridor was dim, lit by a single sconce, and the polished floor shone wet from the guests' damp umbrellas. A hush reigned, until a muffled sob drifted from behind the library's heavy oak doors. He opened the door quietly. The library's familiar mahogany shelves loomed. The armchairs were empty, but by the alcove window a solitary figure crouched, shoulders shaking. It was Violet Carstairs, her dark hair tumbling loose as she pressed her face into her hands. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said softly, stepping into the lamplit room, "I trust I do not disturb you." She lifted her head, tears shining on her cheeks. "Monsieur Poirot, I'm sorry." He approached calmly. "Pray, sit. It is better to speak freely than in secret anguish." He guided her to an armchair and sat opposite, steepling his fingers. "I have found these letters." He placed the bundle gently on the table between them. "Letters from Lord Ashbourne to you." Her chin trembled. I feared they had been discovered." She wiped her eyes. "I did not destroy them. I swear it. It was never my intention to harm anyone." "Then why hide them in the secret drawer?" Poirot pressed. "And why did they bear such urgency?" She drew in a trembling breath. "Because I love him. I cannot help it. We met 3 times. I thought our meetings innocuous, platonic even, but he confided in me his troubles." Her voice faltered. "When I heard he had written to Dr. Grant, I was jealous. I feared their liaisons were more than friendship." "You feared rivalry," Poirot murmured, "and yet you claim you did not break the inkstand." Her eyes widened. "No, never. I discovered the secret drawer by accident and hid the letters there, hoping to find clarity. When I returned later and saw the inkstand shattered, I thought perhaps someone else sought to destroy evidence of his infidelity." Poirot nodded. "A reasonable assumption. But do you know who might wish to eliminate correspondence to Dr. Grant, or to you?" Violet shook her head. "I do not. I overheard Dr. and Lord Ashborne speaking in hushed tones of a wager. I assumed it concerned Colonel Fitzroy, but I did not intervene." "And you, mademoiselle, did you witness any altercation?" Poirot asked gently. She hesitated. "I thought I heard raised voices this afternoon. I was at the piano, Miss Carstairs, working through Bach, I believe." She flushed at Poirot's quip, but continued. "I heard a man's voice, tense, accusing, and a woman's reply. I presumed it was Lord Ashborne and his wife. But now I am not certain." Poirot rose. "Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been most forthcoming." He paused, studying her face in the lamplight. "Your loyalty to Lord Ashborne is touching, but we must seek truth more than sentiment." He gathered the letters and left Violet wiping away the embers of her tears. In the corridor he paused again, mind racing. 3 secret correspondences, letters to Dr. Grant, torn scrap hinting at midnight meetings, letters to Violet begging discretion, and yet the first letters he saw to E.G. scarred by fear of financial ruin. Each thread wove into a tapestry of betrayal. But who acted first? His next step lay with Colonel Fitzroy and the wager. The Colonel's business interests had been bound with Lord Ashbourne's investments. Had the Colonel tried to cover losses, or expose the wager to dinner guests? He crossed to the library's outer door and found Colonel Fitzroy leaning against the frame, arms folded. "Ah, Poirot!" the Colonel said, voice tight. "I thought perhaps the ladies were too distraught to continue their game of whist downstairs." Poirot smiled thinly. "Colonel, I trust you had a good evening?" The man bristled. "As well as can be expected under the circumstances." "Indeed." Poirot held up the letters. "May I trouble you for your copy of that wager agreement you discussed with Lord Ashborne? It must exist in writing." The Colonel's jaw clenched. "I know of no written agreement. Everything was verbally agreed." He paused. "But you would do well to ask Dr. Grant. She advised on the matter." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci. That is most helpful." He turned away, stifling a flash of irritation. The Colonel's evasion only confirmed his suspicion. The wager was a pretext. The motive for destroying letters went deeper. Descending to the drawing-room, Poirot encountered Sir Rupert Mallory strolling by the grand piano. The baronet offered a courteous nod. "Sir Rupert," Poirot said, "a moment, if you please." He guided him to a settee near the hearth. "Tell me of your investments with Lord Ashborne." Sir Rupert leaned back, cigar unlit. "I invest lightly, mostly through Ashborne & Co. It is a sound enterprise." He sipped brandy. "Why do you inquire?" "Because someone broke the inkstand to destroy proof of indiscretions. I wonder if financial or romantic indiscretions best explain the act." Poirot studied the baronet. "Did you write to Lord Ashbourne this evening?" Sir Rupert's eyes flickered. "Just a note confirming dinner arrangements." "And did it mention any midnight meetings?" Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. "No, and I find midnight an odd hour for a gentleman of Lord Ashbourne's stature to wander his garden." Sir Rupert paused. "I did see Dr. Grant leave for the conservatory earlier." Poirot's moustache twitched. Each allusion, each misdirection bore seeds of truth. He rose. "Thank you, Sir Rupert. Your candour is appreciated." As he returned to the study, the distant clock struck 11. The storm had lessened to a steady patter, yet within the house tensions remained high. Poirot paused in the doorway of the study and regarded the broken inkstand illuminated by the lamplight. The threads of jealousy, secrecy, and betrayal crisscrossed the opulent room. He reached once more for the scrap of torn paper in his notebook. Trust only. Trust only whom? E.g., V.C., or another unseen confidant? The answer lay in understanding whom Lord Ashbourne truly trusted, and who among them wielded both opportunity and motive. Closing the desk drawers, Poirot placed the letters neatly on top. Tomorrow's conversations would confirm his suspicions. For tonight, though, the little grey cells required respite. He extinguished the lamp. The study plunged into soft darkness. Beyond the window, lightning faded, leaving only the gentle rumble of thunder. And in that silent moment, one truth became clear. The puzzle of the broken inkstand had only begun to reveal its true shape. The culmination would demand confrontation, confession, and a final reckoning of all hearts involved. But for now, the stage was set, and Poirot, ever the conductor of human drama, prepared to strike the final chord. Chapter 5. Shadows in the morning. Mist-dawn broke over Ashborne House in a pale haze, the morning mist curling around the wrought iron, gates and seeping into the great windows of the library like a tentative visitor. Hercule Poirot stood at the tall windows of the drawing-room, hands clasped behind his back, watching the rose bushes glisten with dew. The night's revelations still echoed in his mind. Clandestine letters, secret drawers, midnight rendezvous, each clue pointing to lovers and conspirators. Yet there remained one conspicuous absence: Lord Ashbourne himself. Lady Ashbourne entered quietly, carrying a porcelain cup of tea on a silver tray. Her eyes were drawn to Poirot's profile in the mist-light. She set the tray on a side table. "You look far away, monsieur," she said gently. Poirot turned. "I was considering our host." He accepted the tea, lifting the delicate china with precise fingers. "Lord Ashbourne has not yet appeared. It is unusual for a host to remain absent at breakfast." She inhaled, a soft tremor betraying her calm exterior. "He retired to his study immediately after dinner. I advised him to rest. He has been under terrible strain these past days." "Indeed." Poirot took a small sip. "Madame, may I speak with you frankly? The puzzle of the broken inkstand grows more intricate with each passing hour. I wish to know what you have not yet told me." Lady Ashbourne's gaze dropped. I will tell you anything." She hesitated, then spoke quietly. "My husband discovered something in his accounts, evidence of a substantial loss at Ashbornne House. He believed Colonel Fitzroy had misled him regarding that bet. He confronted the Colonel in the library early this morning." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Confronted him? At what hour?" "Before dawn," she whispered. "He slipped down to the library, determined to demand an explanation. I stopped him at the door, but he insisted. He said the fate of his family fortune and his honour depended on it." "Has Colonel Fitzroy admitted any wrongdoing?" Poirot asked, setting his cup aside. Lady Ashbourne sighed. "He denied it outright. He accused my husband of jealousy and suspicion." Their voices grew loud. "Then I heard a crash. I thought, but now I am not certain, that it was the inkstand breaking." Poirot's moustache twitched. "But that occurred last night at 8 o'clock." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Did you hear another crash before dawn?" He hesitated. "I heard murmurings, but my door was locked. I did not investigate." "Très bien." Poirot straightened. "I must speak with Colonel Fitzroy at once." Leaving the drawing-room, Poirot found the Colonel in the library, pacing beside the empty alcove bench. His uniform was now plain morning attire, but his face still bore the tension of the night. "Colonel," Poirot began, "tell me of your meeting with Lord Ashbourne just after midnight." The Colonel stiffened. "I told you nothing happened after 8 o'clock, Poirot. I was asleep." Poirot held up his hand. "I understand. Yet Lady Ashbourne insists your voices rose in anger before dawn." Fitzroy ran a hand through his hair. "This is absurd. I retire early. I left no note regarding any meeting. I was in bed by 10. If my wife heard anything, it was a dream, or the wind. Perhaps." Poirot studied the Colonel. "But a storm passed through the house. Last night, rumblings, footsteps. Someone brought Lord Ashbourne to the library again." He paused, letting the implication settle. "Perhaps to retrieve or to destroy the letters we found." The Colonel's face paled. "You think someone wanted those letters? Think someone coveted them?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. Dr. Grant, Miss Carstairs, Colonel Fitzroy, each had cause, but only one had the determination and means to break the inkstand twice. He turned away and strode toward the secret drawer's location. The Colonel followed, curiosity and fear mingling on his features. In the study, the shattered crystal lay reassembled on the blotter, ribbons of black and crimson flecking the linen. Poirot knelt and touched a shard, then pressed his ear to the desk's wood. "Listen," Fitzroy shook his head. "I hear nothing." Poirot pressed again. A faint hollow note responded. He tapped the wood thickly, then near the secret seam. There. He pressed the panel and it clicked open. The drawer. Inside the recess lay the remaining letters, this time addressed to Colonel Fitzroy himself. Each bore the Colonel's signature in confident ink, promises of shared profits, instructions on using insider information, entreaties to maintain discretion. The final note, dated the day before, read, "All will be resolved at dawn. Come without fail." Fitzroy's eyes widened. How did these get here? Poirot looked up. "Someone wished to frame you for orchestrating those midnight meetings. You were to be the scapegoat when the accounts unravelled. The Colonel sank into a chair. But why? Who would gain by destroying the Ashbourne fortune and setting me against Lord Ashbourne? Consider the staff. Poirot rose. A household where every servant knows the master's habits. One footman, Mr. Barnes, was particularly close to the study. He had his own ambitions. He beckoned the Colonel to follow and hurried to the servants' wing. There he found Mr. Barnes polishing, silver in the pantry. The young footman straightened, wiping his hands. "Monsieur Poirot." "Mr. Barnes," Poirot began, "you served Lord Ashbourne for many years. You handled confidential items. Pray, whose idea was it to break the inkstand again before dawn?" Barnes's eyes darted. I know nothing of another breakage, sir." "Perhaps you will recall this?" Poirot produced the letters addressed to the Colonel, found concealed in the secret drawer. Barnes's face drained of colour. I saw those letters late last night. Mr. Fitzroy never came here." "Indeed." Poirot circled him. "Yet someone placed these here to implicate the Colonel. You were the only one with free access to both the study and the library." The footman swallowed. "Yes, but only on Lady Ashbourne's orders." Poirot paused. "Did she instruct you to move them?" Barnes shook his head vehemently. "No, but Mrs. Pender hinted that the master's secret needed exposure. She said if the colony, Colonel, was involved, then all would become clear." The mention of Mrs. Pender struck Poirot like lightning. He left Barnes abruptly, storming back through the corridor to the maids' quarters. Mrs. Pender stood at her dressing-table, her usually serene face drawn tight. "Madame Pender," Poirot said, "you mentioned overhearing footsteps above, but now it seems you conspired with Barnes to frame the Colonel." She gasped. "Monsieur, no! I only wished Lady Ashbourne to know the truth about the wager." "And you hoped that by planting letters you would force confession?" Poirot's voice was firm. She sank to her knees. "My loyalty is to the family's honour. If the Colonel was betraying Lord Ashbourne, I had to act." Poirot's moustache quivered with disappointment. "Madam, honour founded on deception is no true honour. You turned friend against friend, led two innocent parties into ruin based on rumours." She wept openly. "I only sought to protect Lord Ashbourne." "Yet you nearly destroyed his fortune and friendship," Poirot said. "You broke the inkstand twice, first to destroy letters, then to conceal your guilt." He stood and faced her. "The true culprit is he or she who first broke the seal of trust. But you, Madame Pender, must answer to your conscience." She raised tearful eyes. "I will confess to Lady Ashbourne at once." Poirot nodded. "Good. And now, Colonel Fitzroy, your honour is intact, but your friendship with Lord Ashbourne must be restored. Go to him and clear the air." As the maid fled to seek her mistress, and the Colonel hurried away, Poirot paused in the doorway. The morning mist had lifted. Golden sunlight streamed into the corridor. Shadows retreated. He returned to the study, gathering the letters once more, this time to be returned to their rightful owners. The puzzle of the broken inkstand had been pieced together: misguided loyalty, jealous hearts, and a web of deceit in service of honour. But the final step remained: the reconciliation of friendships and the healing of all broken things, both crystal and human. Chapter 6. Dawn of Revelations. The drawing-room was bathed in the soft glow of morning sunlight filtering through lace curtains when Hercule Poirot entered, his posture composed but alert. The assembled party, Lord and Lady Ashbourne, Colonel Fitzroy, Miss Violet Carstairs, Dr. Eleanor Grant, Sir Rupert Mallory, Mr. Edwin Harris, and the household staff, sat in a semicircle before the crackling fire. The atmosphere was tense, each face reflecting the uncertainties of last night's upheavals. Poirot's sharp eyes flicked from one to another, noting the way Lady Ashbourne's hands trembled at her teacup, and how Colonel Fitzroy's stare was fixed resolutely on the hearth, as if seeking refuge in its dancing flames. "Mes amis," Poirot began, speaking in measured tones that carried through the stillness, "we gather this morning not simply for breakfast, but to lay bare the truths which have long been hidden behind closed doors and broken crystal." He paused, letting the gravity of his words settle. Last evening's events were not the work of a single misfortune, but of multiple deceptions, each driven by jealousy, fear, or misguided loyalty. Lady Ashbourne stiffened, and Dr. Grant gave a faint gasp as Poirot continued. "First, allow me to address the two distinct incidents involving the beloved crystal inkstand. The first occurred at approximately 7:30, when its reservoir was shattered by a deliberate strike from below. The second breakage happened shortly before dawn, intended to conceal fresh evidence." He held up a fragment glinting in the morning light. "Observe the pattern of breakage. The earlier fissures show a clean, horizontal cut, consistent with a woman's slender hand gripping the base. The later shattering radiates outward from the centre, produced by a heavier blow." He set the shard down and turned to Lady Ashbourne. "Madame, you returned suddenly from your chamber on hearing a muffled collision, your right hand trembling and stained with blood." She looked away, voicing a caught breath. "You carried the first blow, and you wiped your palm upon the hem of your silk dressing-gown. Indeed," he held up a second fragment, "this one flecked with pale blue threads caught in its crystal crevice. I discovered this thread in the morning beside your boudoir door. It perfectly matches the fabric of the gown you wore last night." Lady Ashbourne's composure crumbled. Her voice quavered. "Yes, it was I. I saw the letters in the secret drawer, the ones to Dr. Grant, and believed my husband had forsaken me. In a moment of anguish, I struck the inkstand. I did not intend to harm him, yet the glass shattered, and I cut my hand." She covered her face with a trembling hand. "I feared his betrayal." Poirot inclined his head sympathetically. "I understand the pain of a wounded heart, madame. Yet jealousy need not destroy trust. You attempted to erase a confidante's counsel, thinking you could reclaim your marriage's peace." He paused, then addressed Dr. Grant. "Madame, your torn note, mentioning a midnight meeting, was intended for Lord Ashbourne's eyes alone. You planned in secrecy to advise him on his wager and private affairs. You did not anticipate the storm your counsel would unleash." Dr. Grant lowered her gaze, tears glistening as she clasped the scrap in her hand. Poirot turned to Miss Carstairs, whose violet eyes were rimmed with fatigue. "Mademoiselle, you discovered the second cache of letters, these addressed to you, and hid them to protect your own secret liaison. Your jealousy of Dr. Grant's influence over Lord Ashbourne drove you to conceal evidence once more. He produced the letters to Violet, and she nodded, her cheeks flushed. You acted from the heart, yet your actions compounded the deception. A collective murmur arose as Poirot stepped toward Colonel Fitzroy. Colonel, you were innocent of framing letters. Yet you provided the impetus for these clandestine meetings by pressing your wager upon Lord Ashbourne, a bet you both knew endangered his assets. You spoke of shared profits, of insider information, and expected discretion. That gambit set all others aflame. Colonel Fitzroy bowed his head, the weight of guilt evident, though he remained absolved of the inkstand's destruction. Sir Rupert Mallory cleared his throat. And what of myself, Monsieur Poirot? His voice carried a note of wounded pride. Poirot nodded gravely. You, Sir Rupert, played the silent confidant. You handed Lord Ashbourne the final letter of assurance, affirming your faith in his judgment. Yet you did so unwittingly, reinforcing his secret rendezvous with Dr. Grant. Your loyalty, misplaced, though it was, tied you to the chain of events. Mr. Edwin Harris, ever composed, folded his notebook. And I? He asked. Poirot's gaze softened. You observed the patterns, Monsieur Harris, noting footprints in the conservatory and the echo of voices. Your curiosity led you into the mist, where you found the torn note. You sought truth for your article, not malice. Having named each, party's part, Poirot raised a gloved hand. Now, we must reconcile these fragments into harmony. He turned to Lord Ashbourne, who had until now remained silent. The Lord, pale and weary, rose unsteadily. My friends, and my wife, he began, voice cracking, I confess I have brought this upon us. My ill-advised wager with Colonel Fitzroy, my secret counsel with Dr. Grant, and my confidences to Miss Carstairs have wounded the very trust I valued most. I entreat your forgiveness. Lady Ashbourne stepped forward, taking his hand. I forgive you, Edmund, she said softly, using his Christian name for the first time. Colonel Fitzroy and Sir Rupert joined in, offering nods of reconciliation. Even Miss Carstairs and Dr. Grant exchanged expressions of mutual understanding. The shadow of competition lifting. Poirot's little moustache quivered with satisfaction. See how the restoration of trust mends the broken crystal of friendship? He swept a final glance across the room. Let this be a lesson, that secrets like shards of glass may cut deeply, and only through honesty can they be gathered anew. As the household exhaled in collective relief, the sunlight warmed the chamber, dispelling the long shadows of suspicion. Over cups of steaming tea and a breakfast served in the grand dining room, the guests and family resolved to rebuild their bonds. And as Hercule Poirot took his leave, his duty fulfilled, he mused that even the most intricate puzzles of the heart could yield to the eye. Simplest truths, trust, confession, and forgiveness. Chapter 7. The Vanished Ledger. The morning light had grown brighter when Lord Ashbourne summoned Poirot to his private study. The air was thick with lingering tension, as if the very walls awaited some further revelation. Hercule Poirot crossed the threshold with measured steps, noting how the usual order of the study's furnishings had subtly shifted. The mahogany writing desk stood slightly askew, and the green baize lining of the secret drawer showed a faint crease at one corner, as though it had been recently disturbed. Mon ami! began Lord Ashbourne, anxiety threading his voice, "I have discovered something most alarming." He gestured toward the locked cabinet that stood against the wall opposite the desk. "My ledger is missing." Poirot's grey eyes narrowed. "Your ledger, you say? The one containing the detailed accounts of Ashbourne and Cohen, including the dates and amounts of the wager you placed with Colonel Fitzroy?" Lord Ashbourne nodded, shoulders slumping. "Yes, every entry from the past 3 months. I was preparing to balance accounts this morning when I found the cabinet open, the ledger gone. The key was still in its lock. It could only have been taken by someone with access to my study." "Indeed," Poirot murmured, stepping closer to the cabinet. He examined the lock's surface for scratches or telltale marks, but found none. "And when did you last see the ledger?" "This very desk, last night before retiring," Lord Ashbourne replied. "I always keep it close, either on the desk or within the cabinet. I entered the room this morning before anyone else. No one could have accessed it during the night unless they entered unseen." Poirot touched the edge of the cabinet's door. "Yet the secret drawer shows signs of recent use, as do these impressions on the baize." He knelt, running a finger along the crease in the lining. "Someone sought to distract attention from this drawer by focusing our inquiries on the broken inkstand. While we were occupied, they rifled the cabinet." Lord Ashbourne stared, realization dawning. "You mean, while you conducted your morning recapitulations, they struck again?" "Precisely. But to comprehend who had motive to steal the ledger, we must consider who benefits." Poirot rose, glancing back at the suite of portraits that lined the walls. Ancestors, whose stern gazes seemed to judge the current turmoil. The account's disappearance suggests someone wished to erase evidence of the wager, either to protect Colonel Fitzroy, to incriminate him further, or to cover their own involvement. A sudden rap at the door interrupted them. Lady Ashbourne entered, composed yet carrying the weight of sleeplessness in her eyes. She curtsied. "My husband, Monsieur Poirot, Colonel Fitzroy has requested an audience with you." "Very good," Poirot said, inclining his head. "Please show him in." Lady Ashbourne departed, leaving the two men alone once more. Moments later, Colonel Fitzroy appeared, his expression grave but determined. He saluted Poirot with measured courtesy. "I hear your ledger has vanished, Poirot. I fear this casts me in the worst light once again." Poirot shook his head. "Not at all, Colonel. I believe we must proceed with calm reasoning. Tell me, did you visit the study this morning before Lord Ashbourne discovered the theft?" The Colonel's jaw tightened. "I did. I came to apologize, further for my part in last night's deceptions. I sought his forgiveness." He paused. "When I entered, the cabinet was closed. I saw nothing unusual, and I left almost immediately upon finding him absent." "Did you happen to glance at the lock?" Poirot asked. "No." "Why?" Colonel Fitzroy replied, perplexed. "Because the key remained in the lock this morning," Poirot explained. "Someone intended it to appear locked, to dissuade suspicion. Yet they neglected to remove or replace the key properly." He produced a small magnifier. "Observe how the key's teeth bear faint smudges of yellow wax, likely from one of Lady Ashbourne's candles. This suggests the entry occurred in low light, perhaps by a slender hand holding a candle close to avoid detection." Colonel Fitzroy's brows furrowed. "A narrow hand, like a woman's?" "Perhaps, Poirot agreed. "But let us not leap to conclusions. You mentioned you came unannounced. Did anyone else know of your intention to return to the study? This morning?" The Colonel shook his head. "No one. I confided only in my wife, who advised against further meetings. I never told Lady Ashbourne of my plan." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "Then your presence cannot explain the ledger's removal. We must widen our inquiry." He turned to the door and called, "Lady Ashbourne." Her footsteps echoed through the corridor as she returned promptly. "Yes, monsieur?" she asked, expression resolute. "Your lady's maid, Mrs. Pender, had special access to your study for attending to the dressing-table and dressing you in the morning." Poirot's gaze held hers. "Where was she at dawn?" Lady Ashbourne answered softly. "In her room. She claimed to be unwell. She did not appear at breakfast." "Remarkable," Poirot said. "And yet when I knocked upon her door at dawn, I heard no response. She was not overcome with illness, for her wardrobe remains undisturbed. I suspect she was in the study, perhaps assisting the thief." Lady Ashbourne's face blanched. "You cannot mean Madame Ponder. She is devoted to this household." "Devotion can mask darker motives," Poirot replied gently. "We must speak with her at once." He bade the Colonel and Lady Ashbourne wait, and strode from the room toward Mrs. Pender's quarters, leaving the two to exchange anxious glances. The maid's door stood slightly ajar. Poirot paused, then entered. Mrs. Pender knelt beside the bed, pretending to tidy under the sheets. She looked up with wide, startled eyes. "Monsieur Poirot, Madame Ponder," Poirot said quietly. "I believe you removed the ledger from the cabinet this morning." Her expression fluttered between shock and defiance. "Why did you do it?" She swallowed, rising slowly. I sought to protect Lady Ashbourne." She clutched her hands. "When I saw the ledger gone, I feared its disappearance would ruin her reputation as mistress of this house. I resolved to find it first, to return it discreetly, perhaps to spare her further humiliation." "And yet no return occurred," Poirot noted, crossing the room. "Instead, the ledger remains missing, and you beseech us to believe you acted unassisted." He lifted a cushion from the chair and shook it. Out tumbled a fragment of parchment, stained by ink. He unfolded it. The uppermost entry of the ledger, the date and amount of the wager with Colonel Fitzroy, now detached from its book. "You tore out this page to hide what you believed was the root of all discord." She brushed away tears. "I confess, I feared that if Colonel Fitzroy's wager were exposed, he would face disgrace, and Lady Ashbourne would be blamed for hosting such men here." She sank onto the bed. "I intended to find the ledger, destroy the portion I deemed harmful, then replace it, so all would believe some clerical error had occurred." Poirot's moustache quivered with disappointment. "Madame, meddling with truth, even to protect, is perilous indeed. You compounded the crime you sought to prevent." Mrs. Pender bowed her head. "I shall return the rest of the ledger and beg forgiveness." "Good," Poirot said. "However, you must first reveal where you concealed it." Trembling, the maid handed Poirot a small wooden box. Inside lay the missing ledger, its binding intact, save for the missing page. Poirot closed the box gently. "Thank you, madame. Mistress and Colonel await news." As he departed, Mrs. Pender sank back, tears flowing unchecked. In the corridor, Poirot paused to steady his thoughts. The final piece of the puzzle lay before him. A ledger with one page removed, a maid's misguided devotion, and a household fractured by secrets. Returning to the study, he found Lady Ashbourne and Colonel Fitzroy waiting. With calm yet authoritative voice, Poirot recounted Mrs. Pender's confession and produced the ledger. He placed it before them. The ledger is returned, though its contents were nearly mangled by well-intentioned hands. The wages entry, now found and restored, will remain as testament to truth. Lord Ashbourne exhaled relief, while Violet Carstairs and Dr. Grant, summoned for witness, exchanged sympathetic glances. Colonel Fitzroy bowed respectfully to the maid's quarters, no longer resentful. Together they watched as Poirot closed the cabinet and locked it firmly. "Let all learn from this," Poirot said, standing amidst them, "that even the smallest deception can cascade into chaos, and that trust, once broken, may only be restored through honesty, no matter how painful." As the assembled company dispersed to face the new day, the ledger safely returned, and the inkstand repaired by a skilled craftsman, Poirot lingered for a moment in the study's doorway. The light of morning shone upon him, and he reflected that the most intricate puzzles are those woven from human hearts. But with patience, empathy, and the guiding discipline of logic, even the darkest secrets can emerge into daylight. Chapter 8. Traces in the margin morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of Lord Ashbourne's study, casting delicate patterns across the walnut desk. Hercule Poirot stood before the recently restored cabinet, its brass lock now polished to a gleaming sheen. The ledger lay open upon the desk, its pages once more laid bare to the world. Yet Poirot's keen gaze lingered not on the bold entries, but on the narrow margins beside them. Tiny annotations in a hurried hand, scarcely visible unless one looked with deliberate care. "Remarkable," Poirot murmured, his gloved fingertip hovering above a faint smudge of ink. He fetched a magnifying glass and settled into the high-backed chair. These marginal notes were certainly added after the page. Left the book. "Notice here," he tapped the slim edge of the page, "a dash and the letters MFB. Do you see, Watson? Lady Ashbourne, I mean." Lady Ashbourne approached quietly, her silk dressing-gown whispering against the carpet. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot, but what do they signify?" Poirot narrowed his eyes. "At present, an enigma. There is no family member or acquaintance with those initials that you know of, correct?" She shook her head. "None that I can think of." "Then we must discover who or what MFB refers to. It is a clue hidden in plain sight." Poirot closed the ledger and replaced it gently in the cabinet. "Madame, may I have your permission to consult Lord Ashbourne's bank records? I wish to compare the entries here, particularly the sums noted beside these initials, with the corresponding transactions." Lady Ashbourne hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. I shall ask Mr. Whitfield, our family bank manager, to bring the statements at once." She hurried from the room, leaving Poirot momentarily alone with the desk. He flexed his hands, steeling himself for the day's next challenge. Within the hour, Mr. Whitfield arrived, a prim gentleman of precise manner, carrying a leather satchel and a sheaf of documents. He bowed to Poirot and Lady Ashbourne. Monsieur, madam, as requested, here are the bank statements for the past 3 months. I have highlighted the entries that correspond to the dates in this ledger." He produced a folder of neatly assembled sheets, each stamped with the bank's seal. Poirot thanked him and spread the statements across the desk, aligning dates beside the ledger entries. "Look," he said, pointing to a line dated April 16th, £1,500 withdrawn, annotated in our ledger as MFB. Yet here, the bank record lists only the amount, with no payee specified. He shifted to the next entry, and again on May 2nd, £2,000, same omission. Mr. Whitfield adjusted his spectacles. "That is most unusual, monsieur. Our records generally indicate the beneficiary. I will investigate at once." He retrieved his satchel. I shall return this afternoon with further details." With the bank manager departed, Poirot turned to Lady Ashbourne. "Madame, I recommend caution. Someone has withdrawn substantial sums in your husband's name, referencing these mysterious initials, yet the bank appears unaware of the payee. We must uncover the identity of MFB before more funds vanish." Lady Ashbourne's face was drawn. "I fear another betrayal, monsieur. But where to begin?" Poirot tapped the ledger. "We follow the trail of ink. The annotations, the missing payee, the smudged fingerprints. I believe the next step lies with our household staff. Monsieur Barnes served tea to Lord Ashbourne precisely on those dates, did he not?" She nodded, slowly. "Yes, on both occasions." "Then I shall question him discreetly." Poirot rose and led Lady Ashbourne into the corridor. "Madame, please excuse me momentarily." He turned a corner and found Barnes in the pantry polishing silver. "Mr. Barnes," Poirot said in his soft, precise tone, "a few questions about your duties on April 16th and May 2nd. You served Lord Ashbourne his morning tea in the study, correct?" Barnes stiffened, the cloth in his hand pausing mid-polish. "Yes, monsieur." "And you recall nothing unusual about those mornings?" The footman blinked. "There was. A man waiting in the lobby both times. A stranger who delivered a sealed envelope." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "A stranger?" Barnes nodded. "Tall, wearing a dark overcoat and a bowler hat." He handed Earl Ashbourne an envelope, waited for a moment while tea was served, then departed, without speaking. "Did Lord Ashbourne open the envelope immediately?" Poirot pressed. Barnes hesitated. "He did. He glanced at it, then slipped it into the inside pocket of his coat. He did not show it to me." "Very well." Poirot inclined his head. "Thank you, Mr. Barnes. You may return to your duties." As Barnes scurried away, Poirot reflected. Enigmatic envelopes, anonymous deliveries. These bore the mark of a calculated operation. MFB was no mere acquaintance. He or she had the resources to extract large sums and the cunning to avoid detection. He returned to the study, where Lady Ashbourne awaited. "Madame, I have learned of a courier, an unidentified messenger, delivering sealed missives to your husband on the very dates of the unrecorded withdrawals. We must examine those envelopes." Lady Ashbourne drew a shaky breath. I believe they were placed in my husband's coat pockets. Perhaps they remain there." She left the room and returned in moments, clutching Lord Ashbourne's evening coat, draped on a valet stand. Poirot's eyes lit with anticipation as she handed it over. He carefully inspected the pockets. inner breast pocket, side pockets, until his slender fingers brushed against a folded piece of parchment. He withdrew the envelope, its seal intact. The paper was thick, parchment-like, and bore no crest, only the faint embossing of a monogram in the corner, an intertwined MFB in elegant script. Poirot broke the seal with deliberation and unfolded the letter. His face remained impassive, but his eyes darted across the lines. "Remarkable," he said at last, refolding the letter. "This message instructs your husband to deliver the promised funds to Mrs. Beauchamp's discretion, no questions asked. The signature reads only MFB, of which Mrs. Beauchamp. There are two possibilities in London society." Lady Ashbourne paled. "Mrs. Maud Beauchamp, my late cousin's widow, and Mrs. Millicent F. Beauchamp, the socialite renowned for her charitable trusts. But neither would engage in clandestine payments." Poirot considered, "unless one of them has a grudge or demands hush money." He placed the letter beside the ledger. "We must learn which Beauchamp corresponds with the initials MFB and why your husband acquiesced." "We shall," Lady Ashbourne said, regaining composure. "I will send a discreet inquiry to both widows." Poirot nodded and turned back to the desk, where the morning sunlight had shifted to a warm glow. "Madame, before you depart, please summon Mr. Edwin Harris. As a journalist, his contacts within London's society pages may yield a clue to the identity of MFB." Within a quarter hour, Mr. Harris arrived, notebook in hand. Poirot greeted him with a slight bow. "Monsieur Harris, I have need of your assistance. Here are two names, Mrs. Maud Beauchamp and Mrs. Millicent F. Beauchamp. Kindly determine which is more likely to demand secrecy from Lord Ashbourne's house. Your inquiry must be swift, discreet, and thorough." Harris's eyes gleamed with professional excitement. "Consider it done, monsieur." He scribbled furiously. As Harris departed to pursue his contacts, Poirot and Lady Ashbourne remained in the study, pondering the letters and ledger. The household, now largely cleared of immediate crisis, moved through the lunch hour with a tentative truce. But beneath the calm exterior, new tensions simmered. Poirot closed the ledger and placed it in the cabinet. "The game advances, madame. We have uncovered a secret banker, anonymous deliveries, and an unknown Mrs. Beauchamp. Soon the identity of MFB shall be revealed, and with it the final strand of this tangled web." He smiled with quiet confidence. "Until then, let us watch and wait, for patience, as always, is the surest path to truth." Outside, the London rain had ceased, leaving the streets glistening anew. Inside Ashborne House, however, the next move belonged to an unseen adversary, and Hercule Poirot, ever vigilant, stood ready to meet it. Chapter 9. The Lady of the Ledger. The late afternoon sun slanted through the mullioned windows of the drawing-room, casting long golden rays across the Persian carpet. Hercule Poirot sat in his customary armchair by the hearth, his posture alert even in repose. Across from him, Lady Ashbourne pressed her hands together, her expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Madame," Poirot began, folding his hands over his immaculate waistcoat, "you have sent inquiries to both Mrs. Maud Beauchamp and Mrs. Millicent F. Beauchamp, have you not?" Lady Ashbourne inclined her head. Yes, I asked my solicitor to draft discreet letters, each emphasizing the need for confidentiality regarding any personal transactions with my husband. I feared that if either were informed of my investigation, they might conceal evidence. Prudent, Poirot murmured. He turned his glance toward the window. You will find, however, that the threads of society's tapestry often reveal themselves in unexpected ways. He pressed a small bell on the side table. The soft chime summoned Mr. Arnold, the butler, who entered promptly. Mr. Arnold, Poirot said, kindly request Mr. Edwin Harris to return to the drawing-room. I have a message concerning his inquiry. The butler bowed and departed almost immediately. Poirot and Lady Ashbourne exchanged a glance of quiet reassurance. Moments later, the door opened again, and Mr. Harris stepped inside, notebook and pen in hand. Monsieur Poirot, Lady Ashbourne, he said briskly, I have news. He seated himself beside Lady Ashbourne. My inquiries yielded a definitive lead. He tapped his notebook. Millicent F. Beauchamp is not the figure we seek. She is indeed involved with charitable trusts, but under her maiden name, no secrecy required. Maud Beauchamp, however, recently widowed, has been rumoured to engage in clandestine financial solicitations. Poirot leaned forward. Continue, please. Harris nodded, flipping through his notes. Mrs. Maud Beauchamp inherited a sizable fortune upon her husband's death 6 months ago. Since then, she has made several large withdrawals, over $500 and $2,000 on the very dates your ledger records show, April 16th and May the 2nd. Local registries confirm she purchased an estate in Sussex for exactly those sums. Yet no formal mortgage or purchase record exists. The transactions were handled privately. Lady Ashbourne's eyes widened. But why the secrecy? Why funnel those funds through my husband? Because, Harris replied, Mrs. Beauchamp uses proxies for her acquisitions. It preserves her anonymity and avoids social scrutiny. If she purchased Sussex Manor herself, the gossip columns would have a field day. Instead, she employs agents, trusted intermediaries who receive funds in her name. Poirot tapped his moustache thoughtfully. MFB, Maud Florence Beauchamp. He pronounced each name carefully. The initials match. The anonymous envelopes delivered to Lord Ashbourne contained instructions, and the letters bearing that monogram directed him to transfer the funds. Harris added, moreover, a mutual acquaintance, a solicitor named Mr. Elkins, confirmed that Mrs. Beauchamp insisted on Lord Ashbourne's assistance because they are distant cousins, and he managed many family affairs before his marriage. She trusts him to handle large sums discreetly. Lady Ashbourne covered her mouth. Cousins, she whispered. I never knew. Poirot smiled gently. Such familial ties often lie buried until the right moment. He stood and retrieved the sealed envelope from the coat pocket. This morning I inspected these envelopes for postmarks or peculiarities. Note this embossing on the reverse. He handed the letter to Harris, who turned it carefully, the candlelight reflecting off the monogrammed emboss. Indeed, Maud's stationery, Harris confirmed. I located a matching note in the solicitor's office, stamped on identical heavy parchment. Poirot placed the letter on the table. Our proof is twofold: the matching initials and the known pattern of withdrawals. Now, the question remains, why involve Lord Ashbourne? Why did Mrs. Beauchamp not instruct her solicitor directly? Lady Ashbourne's brow furrowed. Perhaps she desired both discretion and deniability. My husband's position allowed her to bypass strict banking protocols. Very likely, Poirot said, but there is more. He tapped the letter. Her instructions refer not only to funds, but to maintaining silence for the stability of the Beauchamp name within the Ashbourne circle. She feared that public knowledge of the Sussex Manor purchase would strain relations between our families. So she enlisted my husband's help, Lady Ashbourne breathed, and paid him handsomely, incidentally. Poirot nodded, an arrangement mutually beneficial, until the ledger exposed the amounts without revealing the payee. Mrs. Pender's intervention nearly destroyed everything. He turned to Lady Ashbourne. Now, you have choices. To preserve your cousin's anonymity by returning the funds privately, or to reveal her actions and face any ensuing scandal. Lady Ashbourne's gaze dropped to her teacup. I must think. My duty is to my family's honour, but also to the reputation of our name. Poirot offered a reassuring smile. Trust, once broken, requires patience to mend. In the meantime, I shall prepare my report. But first, let us meet with Mrs. Maud Beauchamp, so that she may confirm her identity and intentions. He turned to Harris. Will you accompany me as witness? The solicitor, Mr. Elkins, can arrange a visit to Sussex, or we may receive her here if she is amenable. Harris nodded. I am at your service. Lady Ashbourne stood. I shall write to Mr. Elkins immediately. As she left to fetch writing materials, Poirot and Harris shared a thoughtful glance. Monsieur Harris, Poirot said, your assistance has been invaluable. You must compile your findings in writing, precise dates, sums, and testimonies, so that Mrs. Beauchamp cannot dispute the evidence. Harris set pen to paper, and Poirot settled into his chair once more, the gentle flicker of the fire reflecting the steady resolve in his eyes. An hour later, the solicitor, Mr. Elkins, arrived, accompanied by a polite knock at the door. Lady Ashbourne ushered him into the drawing-room where the trio awaited. Mrs. Beauchamp regrets she cannot attend in person, Mr. Elkins explained, removing his gloves. She is indisposed with a minor neuralgia. However, she has authorized me to present her letter of confession and transfer of funds. She expresses deep regret for any distress caused and wishes to formalize the settlement today. Poirot inclined his head. Very good. May I see the letter? Elkins produced a sealed envelope bearing Mrs. Beauchamp's crest. Poirot broke the seal and read aloud. To Lady Ashbourne and esteemed Mr. Poirot, I, Maud Florence Beauchamp, cousin to Lady Elizabeth Ashbourne, confess my request for anonymity, the utilization of distant proxies, and the substantial sums withdrawn in my name. I apologize for any inconvenience and wish to transfer ownership of Sussex Manor directly to Lord Ashbourne, with all relevant documentation to follow under my official signature. Yours sincerely, M.F. Beauchamp Poirot. Finished. Lady Ashbourne exhaled. She offers Sussex Manor to us? Elkins nodded. Indeed. She absolves your family of any obligation and seeks only to sever the ties quietly. I accept, Lady Ashbourne said, her voice firm. On behalf of my husband and myself, I thank Mrs. Beauchamp for her candour. Poirot folded the letter. and handed it back. "Your resolution is gracious, madam. The matter is closed, save for formal legalities." He rose, smoothing his waistcoat. "Mes amis, today we have unveiled the final layer of secrecy. The Lady of the Ledger herself. May this serve as a reminder that even the most discreet intentions, when entangled with human pride, can precipitate turmoil. Yet, with goodwill and honesty, harmony may be restored." With that, the company dispersed, Lady Ashbourne to finalise, papers with Mr. Elkins, Harris to write his article on private finance and public trust, and Poirot to pen his own meticulous report. Outside, the day waned into evening, the golden light softening into a calm glow. And within Ashborne House, as the shadows retreated and order returned, Hercule Poirot permitted himself a small, satisfied smile. The puzzle of the broken inkstand, the vanished ledger, and the whispered initials had at last yielded their secrets. Justice, as always, had been served, not through force or recrimination, but through the precise application of reason and the gentle art of human understanding. Chapter 10. Dawn of Understanding. The first blush of morning light crept through the tall windows of the drawing-room, painting the walls in shades of amber and rose. Hercule Poirot sat comfortably in his armchair, quietly observing the gentle bustle around him. Lady Ashbourne stood by the fireplace, arranging the last of her correspondence. Colonel Fitzroy polished the brass frame of a family portrait, his usual reserved composure softened by relief. Even Miss Violet Carstairs, seated at the piano, allowed her fingers to hover above the keys in serene contemplation rather than anxious chords. "Mes amis," Poirot said, breaking the hush with his calm, assured voice, "today we shall mark the true conclusion of our curious affair. No longer do we pursue shattered crystal, hidden letters, or missing ledgers. Instead, we shall restore harmony, mend broken hearts, and celebrate the dawn of understanding." Lady Ashbourne turned, offering him a gentle nod. "Monsieur Poirot, your efforts have been nothing short of miraculous. Without your guidance, our household might still be rent by suspicion." She paused, glancing at her husband, Lord Ashbourne, who stood nearby, papers in hand, newly invigorated by the settlement of the Sussex Manor affair. Lord Ashbourne smiled warmly at his wife. "Indeed, and yet it was my own folly, my secret, wagers and clandestine counsel that set this chain of misfortune in motion. I owe a debt of gratitude to you all for your forgiveness and for Monsieur Poirot's incomparable wisdom." Poirot inclined his head. True confession and sincere recompense are the first steps toward reconciliation, but one must also address the emotions intertwined with these events. He rose and paced slowly before the hearth, his favourite ritual when unveiling his final reflections. "Allow me, then, to call upon each of you so that we may speak from the heart." He beckoned Dr. Eleanor Grant forward. The doctor approached with measured grace, her pale blue shawl drifting behind her. "Dr. Grant, your devotion to Lord Ashbourne's well-being was earnest, yet your secrecy bred doubt. How do you wish to proceed?" Dr. Grant met Poirot's gaze, her voice steady despite a tremor in her eyes. "I shall remain in London a few weeks longer, to ensure Edmund's affairs are firmly settled. Afterward, I intend to return to my practice, with no further cause to trouble the Ashbourne family unless invited as a friend. She offered a gentle smile to Lady Ashbourne, and I hope that one day we can share laughter rather than confidences. Lady Ashbourne inclined her head graciously. I would welcome that, Dr. Grant. She extended her hand, which Eleanor took with warmth. Thank you for your honesty and for your counsel when it was needed most. Next, Poirot turned to Violet Carstairs, who rose from the piano bench. Mademoiselle, your letters lay bare a tender heart. Yet, in hiding them, you risked much. Do you wish to remain at Ashborne House, or shall you seek new horizons? Violet's dark eyes softened as she folded her hands. I have found in this house, amidst its chaos and secrets, a clarity of purpose. I shall stay, at least for a time, to complete my novel, and perhaps to explore my own friendship with Edmund. She glanced shyly toward Lord Ashbourne, who offered a courteous bow. Colonel Fitzroy stepped forward next. Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. Colonel, you and Edmund share bonds of comradeship and gentlemanly wagers. Now that the ledger has been restored and responsibilities laid bare, how will you both move forward? Fitzroy looked to Lord Ashbourne. With humility and loyalty. I regret my part in encouraging that ill-fated bet. Let us, henceforth, engage only in wagers of the mind, on chess or horse racing, where no man's fortune or reputation is at stake. Laughter rippled through the group at Fitzroy's proposal, easing the remaining tension. Lord Ashbourne clasped his friend's shoulder. Agreed, and I promise to consult you only after breakfast. Poirot turned toward Mr. Edwin Harris, who stood with notebook in hand. Monsieur Harris, you have observed our affairs with the keen eye of a chronicler. Will you immortalize our episode in print, or will you guard our privacy? Harris grinned modestly. I shall write of the broader lessons, the perils of secrets and the redemptive power of truth. But the intimate details, letters, ledgers, and inkstands shall remain confined to these walls. My readers deserve wisdom, not gossip. Poirot nodded approvingly. Très bien. Wisdom, indeed, is the outcome we desire. Finally, let us turn to the heart of the matter. He looked squarely at Lady and Lord Ashbourne. Your marriage endured trials that might have sundered many a union, yet you stand together still. What say you to this new beginning? Lady Ashbourne laid her hand upon her husband's arm. Edmund and I have learned that trust must be nurtured daily, with openness and compassion. From this day forth, we vow to share our burdens, to speak of finances, fears, and even foolish wagers, so that no secret may grow into a fissure in our bond. Lord Ashbourne bowed his head solemnly. I pledge the same. Let our house be one of welcome and candour, where shadows are dispelled by understanding. As the couple embraced, Poirot permitted himself a small smile. The tapestry of intrigue, jealousy, and compassion had been rewoven into a stronger fabric, one richer for its flaws, yet more resilient for its honesty. A hush fell over the drawing room, broken only by the soft tick of the grandfather clock and the distant song of a blackbird outside. Poirot raised his hand in benediction. Let this moment stand as testament that human hearts, though fragile, may grow ever stronger through trials, and that the greatest mysteries are not always the ones we seek, but the truths we discover within ourselves. With that, the gathering dissolved into quiet conversation and gentle laughter. Lady Ashbourne poured tea for her guests, while Colonel Fitzroy and Mr. Harris compared notes on forthcoming social events. Violet Carstairs lingered at the piano, her fingers touching the ivory keys in a prelude of hopeful melody. Dr. Grant offered a few medical observations to Lady Ashbourne's maid, and even Mrs. Pender, freed from her earlier anxieties, moved with renewed grace. Hercule Poirot, his duty fulfilled, slipped away to the study one last time. There, on the restored desk, he placed his report, a precise account of every twist and turn of the case, beneath the faint glow of the morning sun. He straightened the crystal inkstand, its reservoir once shattered now whole again, crystals gleaming like promises renewed. As he locked the study door, Poirot paused and looked back, the corners of his mouth curving in satisfaction. Within these walls, secrets had been laid bare, grievances aired, and forgiveness granted. In the quiet aftermath, he found the truest reward, the gentle peace of a household reconciled, bathed in the soft light of understanding and the promise of tomorrow. Chapter 11. Echoes of the Past. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of the conservatory, turning droplets on the glass into prisms of pale gold. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and blossoms, and the world outside seemed hushed, as if pausing to listen to the gentle conversation within. Hercule Poirot sat at a small wrought-iron table, his little grey cells content to rest in idle reverie for a moment. Across from him, Violet Carstairs hovered over a notebook, pen poised between slender fingers, while Colonel Fitzroy and Dr. Eleanor Grant debated the merits of returning to London almost in hushed tones. "It is good to see you both comfortable," Poirot observed, inclining his head. "After so many nights of secrets and shadows, the daylight brings welcome solace." Dr. Grant smiled, though her eyes carried a distant sadness. "I find this place quite peaceful, Monsieur Poirot. Ashbornne House has become more than a setting for intrigue. It is, dare I say, a sanctuary of sorts." Violet lowered her pen, meeting the doctor's gaze. "You're quite right. I find inspiration in these walls now, not only for my novel, but for gratitude. Who would have thought that a broken inkstand could lead to such revelations?" Colonel Fitzroy lifted his teacup in a gentle toast. "To revelations, then, and to the honourable restoration of trust." Dr. Grant returned the gesture. "To trust." They sipped, and Poirot allowed himself a moment of contentment. Yet beneath the tranquillity, he detected a faint tremor of unease, as though the house itself exhaled a quiet sigh of relief, tinged with lingering questions. He tapped his moustache thoughtfully. "Mes amis, I would propose we address certain residual matters before we allow ourselves complete repose." Violet arched an eyebrow. "Residual matters? I thought all was settled." "Almost," Poirot replied. "One cannot simply leave unspoken threads to dangle. For instance, what becomes of Mrs. Pender, whose loyalty led her astray? And what of the Ashbourne estate's future, now that Sussex Manor stands offered by Mrs. Beauchamp? We must ensure that no lingering regrets remain." Dr. Grant nodded. "Indeed, I have already spoken with Lady Ashbourne regarding Mrs. Pender. She will remain in service, albeit under probation, and receive a letter of admonishment softened by gratitude for her decades of faithful work." "Excellent," Poirot said. "A fair resolution. As for Sussex Manor, Lady Ashbourne seeks counsel on whether to accept the property outright or to return it with gratitude. The choice impacts not only finances, but familial reputation. Usnil. Fitzroy leaned forward. I believe acceptance shows magnanimity. To return a gift of such value to Mrs. Beauchamp would embarrass her further. Violet tapped her pen. Yet returning it could cement the family's integrity, showing that they value principle over property. And yet, Dr. Grant interjected, Sussex Manor could become a venue for charitable events, a new chapter of goodwill, forging alliances that heal old wounds. Poirot sat back, smiling at the spirited discourse. Ah, the deliberations of life's next stage. Before we decide, however, I wish to revisit one final mystery. The identity of the author of the anonymous note found in the conservatory, the one mentioning trust only. The group fell silent. Even the distant chirp of crickets paused as each exchanged glances. Colonel Fitzroy leaned back, his face reflective. I assumed it was Lady Ashbourne herself, warning Dr. Grant not to trust her, but perhaps I was mistaken. No, it was not Lady Ashbourne, Poirot said, and it was not Dr. Grant nor Violet Carstairs. I have considered carefully who among us possessed both motive and opportunity to leave such a cautionary message, one meant to guard against betrayal. Violet's pen rattled. Who then? Poirot smiled faintly. Our friend Mr. Edwin Harris. Harris, who had been absent from the table until that moment, stepped from the shadows of the glass house's leafy corner, notebook in hand. Monsieur Poirot, you surprised me. I trust you will forgive my bluntness, Poirot said kindly, but you possessed a reporter's instinct for truth and a gentleman's regard for discretion. When you discovered the fragment in the Bourg conservatory, you realized that Dr. Grant might bear the greatest risk, both to herself and to Lord Ashbourne, if her midnight meetings became public. The note you left was meant not to sow discord, but to warn. Harris bowed his head. I did indeed. I feared the consequences for all involved, especially Dr. Grant, whom I hold in the highest esteem. I did not wish to cause chaos. I only sought to prevent a scandal. Dr. Grant rose, placing a hand on Harris's arm. Your intention was noble, Edwin, though the method, well, it added another layer of mystery. Harris smiled sheepishly. I shall content myself with writing about our case, rather than participating in it. Très bien, Poirot said. Now that every note has found its author, we may truly lay the past to rest. He rose and extended his hand. But before we retire, let us make our decisions known. Colonel Fitzroy, your recommendation regarding Sussex Manor. The Colonel stood and looked at each of his companions. I propose we accept the manor on behalf of Lady Ashbourne, then transform it into a retreat for women of limited means. A legacy of goodwill rather than mere real estate. Violet clapped softly. A philanthropic venture, quite lovely. Dr. Grant nodded. A fitting tribute to Mrs. Beauchamp's generosity and the Ashbournes' honour. Poirot turned to Violet. And your novel, mademoiselle, will you remain here until its completion? She smiled warmly. Yes, here, among friends, I find both solace and inspiration. Ashbornne House shall be my home for the foreseeable future. And you, Dr. Grant? Poirot asked. She paused, then spoke with gentle resolve. I shall return to London in a fortnight to resume my practice. Yet I shall always treasure the fellowship here, and I hope to return often as a friend, not a secret confidant." Lastly, Poirot addressed himself to Harris. "Monsieur Harris, you may continue your writings on private finance and public trust, though perhaps with fewer covert notes." Harris laughed. "Agreed, Monsieur Poirot." With that, the company rose and gathered beneath the glass dome of the conservatory. The fading light painted them in a golden glow, as though blessing their renewed bonds. Lady Ashbourne herself entered last, her expression serene. She placed a hand on Poirot's shoulder. "Thank you, monsieur, for everything." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, it has been my greatest pleasure to serve. Now, let the echoes of the past guide you toward a future bright with trust." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, the glasshouse's lanterns glowing softly as evening approached. Then, one by one, they departed, Violet to her writing desk, Dr. Grant to her room, Colonel Fitzroy to his meditation on Sussex Manor, Harris to his notebook, and Lady Ashbourne to her husband. Left alone, Poirot paused by the fountain at the centre of the conservatory, its water murmuring in the stillness. He placed a gloved hand upon the stone edge. "Ah, mon ami," he murmured to himself, "the human heart is indeed the most delicate of puzzles. Yet, when each piece finds its place, through courage, honesty, and a touch of empathy, then the picture is richer for every crack and every mended seam." He lingered a moment longer, watching the water's reflections dance in the lantern light. Then, with a final contented sigh, he turned and walked back toward the house, ready for whatever new mysteries life might bring, and confident that in this house at least trust would prevail. Chapter 12. A new chapter for Sussex Manor. The sun rose pale and gentle over the rolling hills of Sussex as the party's carriage wound its way up the gravel drive of the newly acquired manor. Mist clung to the grass in soft tendrils, and the air carried the fresh scent of dew-kissed earth. Within the carriage, Lady Ashbourne sat beside Hercule Poirot, her eyes bright with anticipation and a touch of apprehension. Opposite them, Colonel Fitzroy consulted a leather-bound journal filled with plans for the estate's transformation, while Violet Carstairs sketched the facade on her notepad, capturing its fine mullioned windows and weathered stone. "Madame," Poirot began quietly, folding his hands in his lap, "today marks the true beginning of your family's next journey. Sussex Manor shall stand no longer as a symbol of secrecy, but as lantern of hope for many." Lady Ashbourne smiled softly. "I trust your counsel, monsieur. I only hope we fulfil the promise we made, to turn this house into a sanctuary for women in need." "Vous êtes merveilleuse," Poirot replied. "Your compassion and resolve shall guide all." The carriage rumbled to a halt, and the group alighted onto the wide veranda. A servant, summoned earlier by Colonel Fitzroy's instructions, appeared and held open the door. Lady Ashbourne paused on the threshold, inhaling the crisp morning air, then stepped inside with dignified grace. The interior of Sussex Manor was a study in faded elegance. High-ceilinged halls lined with worn carpets, walls hung with ancestral portraits whose eyes seemed to follow each guest, and windows low enough to tempt curiosity about the view beyond. A broad staircase curved upward toward a landing where two arched doorways led to private chambers. Colonel Fitzroy moved ahead, lantern in hand, illuminating corners where spiderwebs still clung. "We shall begin here," he said, gesturing to a large reception room to the right of the entrance hall. "This shall serve as the common parlour for our guests." Violet Carstairs stepped forward, her pen already in motion. "The height of these windows will admit bright morning light. Perhaps we hang sheer draperies to soften the glare and create an atmosphere of calm." Dr. Eleanor Grant joined her, examining the wooden floor. "And we should ensure rugs are placed to cushion footsteps. Many may arrive in fragile health or spirit. Comfort is as important as beauty." Poirot moved to a tall armoire whose doors hung slightly ajar. He opened it, revealing rows of hanging coats and an inner drawer containing tarnished silver tea service and chipped porcelain cups. "Ah!" he exclaimed, "a perfect find. These may serve our first guests. A condolence gathering, perhaps. They require no costly replacements. Rather, a careful polish and some fresh china will suffice." Lady Ashbourne nodded fervently. "We shall have the maid's team bring these here to the drawing-room once we have cleaned and refreshed them." As they dispersed to examine various chambers, Violet to the writing-room, Dr. Grant to the small infirmary suite they planned to establish, Colonel Fitzroy to the stables and gardens, Poirot lingered in the vestibule. He tapped his cane thoughtfully on the marble floor. This manor, like the broken inkstand of Belgrave Square, had once held secrets and scars. But here those scars would be transformed into a legacy of healing. Footsteps approached, and he turned to see Lady Ashbourne rejoin. Him her gaze curious. "Monsieur, do you believe Sussex Manor can truly be remade so quickly?" Poirot's little grey cells twitched. "Remaking a house is simpler than remaking hearts." He smiled gently. "But the two often go hand in hand. You have assembled a team of compassionate minds. Violet's artistry to soothe, Dr. Grant's healing hand, Colonel Fitzroy's steadfast leadership. With your own warm hospitality, the house will flourish in time." She studied his serene expression and felt a wave of confidence. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. It means so much to have your reassurance." He inclined his head, "And now, if we are prepared, I suggest we walk the garden, a place of promise. The rose arbour by the east terrace would benefit from pruning, and the herb beds would serve both ceremonial teas and medicinal purposes." They walked through French doors onto the terrace, where dew still clung to blue blooms and lavender. The garden was tangled with overgrown hedges and unruly shrubs. But Lady Ashbourne saw past the neglect to the potential. Winding paths, sundial stones, and a low stone wall overlooking a valley that stretched into distant woodlands. "Imagine, the benches here," she said, pointing, "and seats of rest where our guests may contemplate, write, or simply breathe in the tranquillity." "Precisely," Poirot agreed. And here he knelt to examine a patch of chamomile. "These daisies are natural soothers. We shall cultivate more of them for teas." He looked up at her with bright eyes. "Every detail matters, madam." Colonel Fitzroy and Violet joined them, sketching layouts and making notes, while Dr. Grant collected samples of mint and thyme. Evening drew near, and the golden light gave the garden a peaceful glow. At sunset, they reconvened in the old dining hall, its vast hearth framed by carved wooden panels. A long table was set with gleaming silver and fresh linens brought from Belgrave Square. The soft aroma of stew, prepared by the Ashborne cook, filled the air. Lady Ashborne surveyed the scene with satisfaction. "Dear friends," she said, raising a crystal glass of elderflower cordial, "to Sussex Manor. May its doors open wide to those whose burdens weigh heavy. May this house become a refuge of hope and renewal." They echoed her toast, voices warm and earnest. Colonel Fitzroy offered a short speech about stewardship. Violet read a brief poem of solace, and Dr. Grant spoke of healing through community. Poirot simply raised his glass and nodded, his eyes reflecting pride in the transformation begun. Later, after the meal, Lady Ashborne and Poirot walked the corridors by lamplight. "Madame," he said softly, "you have done more than restore a house. You have reclaimed joy in your own life." She squeezed his arm gratefully. "And you, Monsieur Poirot, have guided me to see that from broken things, whether inkstand or ledger, can emerge new purpose." He smiled, his moustache quivering. "Exactly so. Now rest, dear lady. For tomorrow, Sussex Manor's true test begins, welcoming its first guests." Lady Ashborne climbed the grand staircase to her suite, pausing to look down at her assembled friends gathered by the hearth of a smaller sitting room. Violet playing a gentle lullaby on a borrowed piano, Dr. Grant discussing schedules for medical check-ins, and Colonel Fitzroy supervising the placement of candles and lanterns for the night. The house hummed with quiet contentment. In the stillness that followed, Poirot withdrew to the small study adjacent to Lady Ashbourne's rooms. There he placed his cane gently on a side table, and sat at a desk that once belonged to another anxious steward. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on shelves of medical tomes, gardening guides, and a lone volume of poetry. He opened the drawer, revealing a single crystal inkwell, shiny and intact, a symbol of all they had overcome. He dipped a quill into the inkwell and began to write. "Sussex Manor, May 23rd, 1927 today, marks the first day of transformation. No mystery lingers here, only the promise of purpose. Lady Ashbourne bids this house welcome all who seek solace. Dr. Grant offers her healing art. Colonel Fitzroy lends his steadfast care. Miss Carstairs brings beauty of thought and word. Decide, this house, once secret, now stand open, its doors an invitation to hope." Poirot paused, laid down his quill, and gazed at the words. A gentle smile curved his lips. In that moment he felt no need to solve riddles or unravel deceptions. Here, the greatest mystery of how broken lives could be mended had already found its answer. He rose, extinguished the candle, and closed the drawer with care. Tomorrow would bring fresh activities, new guests arriving, registrations for retreats, and the beginning of a daily rhythm rooted in kindness. But for tonight, the only sound was the soft sigh of wind through the oaks outside. Content, Hercule Poirot locked the study door and made his way to his bedchamber within the manor's west wing. As he drifted into slumber, his last waking thought was of the crystal inkwell, a testament that even the most fragile things, once repaired with patience and goodwill, could hold ink again and continue to write new stories. Chapter 13. The First. Guests arrive. The morning sun shone brightly as the carriage bearing the first group of guests drew up the gravel drive of Sussex Manor. A small party emerged. Miss Eleanor Reeves, a governess recently widowed, Mrs. Josephine Clark, a gentlewoman, recovering from a protracted illness, and Miss Beatrice Moore, a schoolteacher seeking respite from a demanding year in London. Each carried a modest suitcase, their faces a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. Hercule Poirot stood on the wide veranda beside Lady Ashbourne, greeting them with a warm bow. Colonel Fitzroy and Dr. Grant waited nearby, rifles of welcome at the ready, metaphorical rifles, of course, for emotional defence, and Violet Carstairs lingered with her sketchbook, capturing the moment in quick, confident strokes. "Welcome to Sussex Manor," Lady Ashbourne said, extending her hand to Miss Reeves. The governess's wide grey eyes brimmed with tears. "You have come to the right place, my dear." Miss Reeves curtsied. "Thank you, Lady Ashbourne. I have been so anxious." "Anxiety left at the gate," Colonel Fitzroy said with a reassuring smile, guiding them into the entrance hall. "Your rooms are being prepared even now." Dr. Grant offered each guest a delicate cup of herbal tea. "Chamomile and mint, for calm nerves," she explained. "We find it works wonders." Miss Moore inhaled deeply and allowed herself a small smile. "It's fragrant and so reassuring." Violet moved among them as they passed under the grand staircase. "I'll show you to the sunlit writing room," she said, "where you may pen your thoughts or simply gaze out at the garden." Poirot observed each face, noting the subtle relaxation that followed their first steps into the manor. He closed, his eyes briefly savouring the harmony of the moment, the low murmur of conversation, the soft clink of china, the distant song of a skylark in the hedgerows. A noble purpose, he thought, healing through beauty and companionship. Once the guests were settled, the Ashbourne party gathered in the breakfast room for a quick debrief. "Remarkable," Poirot said, sipping his coffee. "Already the atmosphere feels lighter?" Lady Ashbourne nodded, her expression one of pleased relief. "They arrived more nervous than I anticipated, yet the tea and your greetings have set them at ease." Dr. Grant tapped her watch. "I propose a gentle tour of the gardens in half an hour. Fresh air and movement are best for first-day jitters." Colonel Fitzroy unfurled his journal. "I have arranged for the gardeners to guide them to the rose arbour, where we shall plant a symbolic sapling for each guest, a token of new beginnings." Violet smiled. "And I'll distribute sketch pads. I find creativity unlocks the soul." Poirot folded his napkin. "Très bien. And I will offer each guest a small memento, a crystal paperweight from the old inkstand, polished anew as a reminder that even broken things can be restored." Lady Ashbourne's eyes glistened. "Perfect." Within the hour, the guests gathered in the east garden, flanked by lavender hedges and dew-speckled boxwood. The gardeners had cleared a circular bed near the sundial, its stone face engraved with the motto, Tempus Revelet Veritatem. Time reveals truth. Dr. Grant knelt beside Miss Clark, explaining how to press mint leaves between the pages of her journal to preserve their fragrance. Miss Clark offered a shaky laugh. "I haven't laughed like this in months," she said. Miss Reeves and Miss Moore exchanged shy glances as Colonel Fitzroy presented each of them with a small oak sapling. Plant this with intention, he instructed. Each year, as it grows, may your life take root anew. Violet sketched them at work, the careful hands arranging soil, the first tentative pat of earth over tender roots. Beautiful, she whispered to Dr. Grant, capturing the scene in a flourish of pencil strokes. Poirot watched from a stone bench, his keen eyes noticing the way Miss Reeves paused to take in the valley view, as though deciding to let past sorrows fall away with the morning mist. He rose and approached her with measured grace. "Madam Reeves," he said softly, "I trust the first steps of your journey here feel right." She looked up, surprised by his genuine concern. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I was afraid of change, but this," she gestured around, "this feels like home already." He smiled. "Home is where the heart finds hope, and I have no doubt yours will flourish here." As the ceremony concluded, the guests drifted toward the arbour's benches, where Violet offered them cold lemonade spiked with a hint of lavender. Laughter and gentle conversation wove among them, creating a tapestry of camaraderie. Back in the drawing-room, Lady Ashbourne and Poirot paused by the fireplace, a record of the morning's events already taking shape in the pages of Violet's notebook. "Success," Lady Ashbourne sighed, sinking into a velvet armchair. "They seem to trust us." Poirot inclined his head. Trust, once lightly placed, must be continually nurtured. We shall offer afternoon workshops in journaling, gentle music by Miss Carstairs, and light exercises under Dr. Grant's supervision. Dr. Grant entered with a tally sheet, and dinner will be at 6, with conversation prompts, topics like joy in small moments and finding strength in community. I find such structure comforting. Colonel Fitzroy appeared in the doorway. "I have scheduled the first stables visit at 4 for those who wish. Fresh air and animal companionship can be most therapeutic." Lady Ashbourne beamed. "We thought of everything." Poirot pressed a gloved finger to his moustache. "Indeed, and in the evening, a brief talk by Monsieur Harris on the art of rebirth, drawing on his observations from our recent affair." Harris nodded. "I shall speak only of universal lessons, nothing personal." Poirot exchanged a satisfied glance with Lady Ashbourne. The structure was in place, a delicate balance of routine and freedom, activity and reflection. As the guests returned to the manor for luncheon, chatting animatedly in small clusters, the Ashbourne party dispersed to their tasks. Violet retreated to the writing-room to lay out paper and quills. Dr. Grant moved to the infirmary to check vitals and prepare herbal compresses. Colonel Fitzroy visited the stables to ensure the horses were ready for afternoon walks. Poirot returned to his study to polish each crystal memento, wrapping them in velvet pouches for that evening's presentation. Moments before the luncheon bell, he paused at the door, taking a final breath of the scented corridor air. His mind wandered to the broken inkstand in Belgrave Square, its shards scattered, its purpose lost, until one man's careful reconstruction restored both crystal and trust. Here, at Sussex Manor, countless small acts of renewal were weaving their own mosaic. He straightened and closed the door softly. Ahead lay new stories to guide, new confidences to honour, and new lives to watch bloom. For Poirot, the greatest mystery was never about crime, but about the human capacity to heal, and in the gentle hum of Sussex Manor's first day with guests, he saw that mystery already unfolding into triumph. Chapter 14. A Gathering at Twilight. The golden glow of late afternoon softened into warm rose and amber as the guests of Sussex Manor made their way from the gardens to the grand dining hall. Candlelight danced across the oak panels, and crystal chandeliers shimmered, casting prismatic fragments of colour on the polished floor. A hush of anticipation fell over the company as Lady Ashborne stood at the head of the long mahogany table, poised to welcome her inhabitants to the first formal evening gathering of their retreat. "Mesdames," Lady Ashborne began, her voice gentle yet resonant, "I am honoured to share with you this first evening of reflection and fellowship. Tonight, we dine together not merely as hosts and guests, but as companions on a journey toward renewal." She raised her glass, sparkling elderflower cordial, infused with a hint of rose, and the women echoed her gesture, their voices mingling in a soft chorus of clinks. At the far end of the table, Dr. Eleanor Grant offered a comforting smile. She had arranged small bowls of lavender-infused water at each place setting, encouraging the women to breathe deeply before the first course. Dark-haired Miss Reeves inhaled, closing her eyes as the lavender scent calmed her racing heart. Next, to her, Mrs. Clark brushed a trembling hand across her blouse, steadying herself for the communal experience. Colonel Fitzroy stepped into the centre of the hall, clearing his throat. "Ladies, after we have partaken of our meal, I invite you to join me for a brief walk in the East Cloister," he announced. "There, we will gather beneath the rose arbour to reflect on the day's events and plant our own hopes for tomorrow." His tone was warm, encouraging each guest to share a single thought or intention. Violet Carstairs, seated 2 places down from Lady Ashborne, caught Poirot's eye and gave a discreet nod. With a gentle rise, she summoned forth her own opening remarks. "Before we begin, may I read a few lines of verse?" Her voice, clear and mellifluous, carried to every corner of the room. "In twilight's hush, we gather here, hearts unburdened, chins lifted clear, each soul a lantern, faint at first, ignited now by shared discourse." The room remained silent for a heartbeat after she finished, the words lingering like the final notes of a lullaby. Then applause rippled around the table, soft but sincere. As the first course was served, creamy leek soup garnished with sprigs of thyme. Poirot observed each guest quietly, noting how the initial tension had eased into relaxed conversation. Miss Moore was chatting animatedly with Mrs. Clark about her schoolroom experiences, while Miss Reeves and Mrs. Clark whispered confidences born of shared vulnerability. A faint smile curved Poirot's moustache. The intimacy of conversation was already forging new bonds. Halfway through the main course, roast pheasant with a delicate red-currant glaze, Mr. Edwin Harris rose from his seat, tapping his spoon gently against his porcelain plate. "If I may," he began, his voice steady but kind, "I would like to share a few thoughts on the theme of rebirth, drawn from my observations here at Sussex Manor." He spoke of the broken inkstand and the shattered ledger, of secrets mended by confession, and of the oak saplings planted in the morning mist. His words wove a tapestry of collective resilience, emphasizing that new beginnings often grew from the soil of past trials. As Harris spoke, the guests listened with rapt attention. When he concluded, a hush settled, and for a moment all present felt the weight and the possibility of transformation. Colonel Fitzroy lifted his glass in salute, and Lady Ashbourne offered Harris a grateful nod. The final course, lemon posset with lavender shortbread, was brought in on a silver tray by the glimmering footman. As the dessert was passed, Dr. Grant circulated, offering each guest a personalized balm. A sprig of fresh mint tucked beside their plate, said to soothe both spirit and palate. Miss Reeves accepted hers with a shy "thank you," breathing the mint's bright aroma and visibly relaxing with the simple act. Dinner concluded, Lady Ashbourne rose once more. "Dear friends," she said softly, "the evening grows cooler. I invite you now to the cloister, where Colonel Fitzroy will lead our reflection beneath the roses." She gestured toward the double doors at the far end of the hall, which opened onto a narrow stone walkway framed by climbing blooms. The guests, now loosely paired, moved toward the doors. Violet offered her arm to Mrs. Clark, and Dr. Grant accompanied Miss Moore. Poirot and Lady Ashbourne brought up the rear, giving space for the ladies to speak if they chose. The cloister was hushed under a canopy of twilight-scented roses. Lanterns glowed at intervals, their soft light revealing dewy petals and silhouettes of stone columns. Colonel Fitzroy stood at the centre, lifted a lantern high, and spoke of hope. "Tonight," he said, "we plant more than saplings. We plant intentions, courage in place of fear, trust in place of doubt, and grace in place of regret." He offered each guest a small, white rosebud, their petals tight like unopened promises. "Hold this in your hand, close your eyes, and speak your intention aloud." Miss Reeves clutched her rose and whispered, "I intend to let go of my past, grief, and welcome life once more." She opened her eyes, her smile radiant in the lantern light. Mrs. Clark held her rose to her heart. "I intend to find strength in my own body and mind, to live fully again." Dr. Grant nodded, her eyes gleaming. Miss Moore, voice steady, said, "I intend to be patient with myself and seek joy in each day, however small." Violet and Lady Ashbourne offered encouraging smiles. Poirot watched as each guest spoke, noting how the simple ritual connected them in shared vulnerability. Finally, he accepted a rosebud himself and held it aloft. Clearing his throat, he said in his gentle French accent, "I intend to cherish the beauty of human kindness and to cultivate curiosity in every heart I meet." His little grey cells had seldom felt such warmth at their core. Afterward, they planted the rosebuds in small pots that Colonel Fitzroy had prepared, markers of each woman's resolve. As they worked, a hush of companionship enveloped the group, a moment of unity that transcended words. When the planting was complete, Lady Ashbourne guided her guests back through the cloister, the lanterns flickering like guardians of their shared vow. At the hall's entrance, she offered each guest a crystal memento, the polished fragment from the old inkstand, tied with a silk ribbon. "This," she said, "is a reminder that even the smallest crack can be mended, and that beauty lies in what endures." Miss Reeves pressed the crystal to her lips. "I shall treasure it always." Mrs. Clark and Miss Moore echoed her sentiment, their voices gentle with gratitude. Back in the drawing-room, the company settled around a low table where Violet had arranged envelopes containing each guest's journal, prompt for the following morning. Gratitude lists, reflections on courage, and meditations on hope. Dr. Grant offered guided breathing exercises, her soft voice weaving through the room like a lullaby. Colonel Fitzroy discussed plans for a sunrise walk in the orchard, while Poirot, seated off to one side, polished his crystal with meticulous care. Lady Ashbourne moved among her guests, placing warm wraps around their shoulders and fetching cups of chamomile tea. "This night is yours," she whispered to Miss Moore, "to rest and dream." The corners of Mother Moon crept through the shuttered windows, bathing the room in a calm silver light. Moments later, the first group of guests retired to their rooms, leaving the Ashbourne party to close the night. Violet lingered at the piano, playing a soft nocturne that echoed like a promise. Dr. Grant collected her herbal sachets, pleased with the evening's success. Colonel Fitzroy extinguished the lanterns one by one, his steady hands ensuring each flame died gently. Poirot replaced the polished crystals in their velvet pouch, labelling them with neat handwriting. Finally, Lady Ashbourne and Poirot stood alone amidst the quiet glow of the drawing-room. She turned to him, her gratitude heartfelt. "Monsieur Poirot, you have given this house its soul." He inclined his head modestly. "Madame, the soul was always here, in your compassion and in the hearts of your guests. I merely guided the spark." She smiled, and for a moment they stood in companionable silence, listening to the soft final chords of Violet's nocturne. As they extinguished the last candle and the house settled into restful darkness, Poirot offered a final reflection that the greatest mysteries were not those of crime and deception, but of transformation and trust. And here in the gentle hush of Sussex Manor at twilight, that mystery had revealed itself in full splendour. Chapter 15. Midnight Reflections. The house was hushed in the deep hours after midnight, save for the occasional whisper of wind through the oaks and the distant chirp of a solitary cricket. Downstairs, gentle lamplight glowed behind lace curtains. Within those lights, faint forms moved silently, careful not to disturb the slumbering guests. Lady Ashbourne, sleep eluding her, slipped from her chamber and padded along the polished corridor toward the drawing-room, intent on gathering her thoughts before the dawn's tasks began. She paused outside the drawing-room door, noting the low flicker of candlelight and the silhouette of two figures in hushed conversation. Pushing the door ajar, she saw Colonel Fitzroy standing by the fireplace, examining a small sapling that had been left in a corner, one of the morning's plantings still moist with dew. Opposite him, Violet Carstairs knelt beside a low table, strewn with journals and pens. "Forgive me, Lady Ashbourne," Violet whispered without looking up. "I thought perhaps you might join us." Lady Ashbourne offered a tired smile and entered. Colonel Fitzroy rose and greeted her with a respectful nod. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said softly. "Miss Carstairs and I were considering new stationery designs for the retreat's correspondence, something to reflect the spirit of Sussex Manor." Lady Ashbourne's eyes softened. "You need not apologize. I find the night clarifies my thoughts." She crossed the room and settled into an armchair beside Violet, whose sketchbook lay open on the table, a delicate watercolour study of the Manor's rose arbour bathed in moonlight. "It's beautiful," Lady Ashbourne murmured. "You have captured its quiet magic." Violet's lips curved. The garden at night holds different secrets. One sees shapes and shadows that the day conceals. I find inspiration in those mysteries." Colonel Fitzroy knelt to examine the same sapling, turning it gently in the lamplight. "This oak, planted this morning, has already grown in my mind, a legacy of hope for our guests. I wondered if we might carve a small plaque. Seeds of renewal, planted May 2, 1927, and place it in the garden to mark the beginning of our venture." Lady Ashbourne considered. "A fitting tribute. It will remind us and our guests how even the smallest beginnings can flourish over time." They rose, and together they moved to the table where Violet's sketches lay beside a stack of fine stationery. Colonel Fitzroy selected a sheet, placing it under Violet's brush as she mixed a pale wash of lavender with subtle gold accents, a colour reminiscent of the Manor's twilight hues. Lady Ashbourne watched as the design blossomed. A framing border of entwined rosebuds, chamomile flowers, and oak leaves, with a central motif of interlaced hands. As Violet painted, Colonel Fitzroy and Lady Ashbourne spoke softly of tomorrow's programme. A morning of guided meditation in the herb garden, followed by a workshop on journaling one's intentions. They planned to invite Dr. Grant to lead breathing exercises and invited Poirot to deliver a gentle talk on the art of observation to encourage guests to notice beauty in everyday moments. Violet looked up at them. "Shall we include a small motto at the bottom?" she asked. "Something like, 'In quiet reflection, seeds take root.'" Colonel Fitzroy nodded. "Perfect." Lady Ashbourne turned to Colonel. "Will you carve the plaque yourself?" He smiled. The steadiness of his hands suited the task. "I shall." His gaze met Lady Ashbourne's. "And I will seek your counsel on its placement." Just then, a soft rustle drew their attention to the door, where Dr. Grant appeared, holding a tray with cups of lavender tea and a small plate of honeyed biscuits. "I thought you might welcome a late-night refreshment," she said, setting the tray on the table. "I find this blend eases the mind before rest." "Thank you," Lady Ashbourne said, accepting a cup. The sweet steam mingled with the scent of oil lamps. She sipped, eyes closing in appreciation. "Exquisite, Doctor," Grant greeted Violet and Colonel, then fetched a seat near Lady Ashbourne. "I hope you won't mind," she said, "but I've been reviewing the herbal garden's layout for tomorrow's session. I noted some thyme and chamomile sprigs that would be better displayed near the central path." Violet tapped her sketchbook. "I can adjust the map accordingly." The four of them sat in companionable silence, each absorbed in thoughts of how best to nurture the retreat's subtle alchemy. Outside, the waning moon slipped behind a bank of clouds, and for a moment the room flickered into deeper shadow, yet none stirred in alarm. They were united by a shared purpose. After a long pause, Colonel Fitzroy set aside the sapling. "Do you think our guests will find what they seek here?" he asked quietly. Lady Ashbourne looked from him to Violet and Dr. Grant. "I believe they already are. Each has discovered a place to rest, to reflect, and to speak their intentions. And tomorrow we guide them further." Violet smiled. "I have begun sketches of their journals, each uniquely illustrated. I hope they will feel seen." Dr. Grant nodded. "And I will prepare small sachets of herbs for them to carry. reminders of calm throughout their journeys. Colonel Fitzroy's gaze softened. Then our work is already taking root. May Sussex Manor truly become the sanctuary we envisioned. Ashborne finished her tea and rose. Thank you, dear friends. You have given me strength. She turned to Violet. Shall we finish the design, so it's ready for print tomorrow? Violet dipped her brush and added the motto beneath the border. The gold ink shimmered like dawn's first light. Colonel Fitzroy and Dr. Grant leaned in to admire the final touch. Once the design was complete, Lady Ashbourne collected the cups and biscuits, offering each a gentle smile. Now, she said, let us retire. The day comes early, and our guests await. They extinguished the lamps one by one, leaving only a solitary candle to guard their path. Hand in hand, Lady Ashbourne and Dr. Grant, Violet and Colonel, they filed from the drawing-room into the corridor. Each paused to extinguish wall sconces, the mirrors absorbing the last reflections of lamplight. At the top of the stairs, Colonel Fitzroy paused. "Good night, everyone." "Good night," they echoed softly. Before turning down the final corridor to her chamber, Lady Ashbourne looked back at the drawing-room's closed door and breathed deeply. Within those walls lay the heart of Sussex Manor, a place of revelation, of compassion, and of meticulous care. She felt gratitude for the friends who stood by her, and for the retired detective whose wisdom had sparked this journey. In the stillness, she whispered a quiet prayer, that each guest awaken tomorrow with renewed hope, and that each small offering, be it a crystal memento, a rosebud, or a gentle word, might guide their hearts toward healing. Meanwhile, in a chamber across the wing, Hercule Poirot sat at a narrow writing table under the faint glow of a single lamp. He unfolded his notebook and recorded the night's plans, the plaque text, the stationery design, the herbal workshop schedule. His entries were neat, each line a promise to remember every detail. He paused, his pen hovering above the page, and reflected on the curious journey that had begun with a broken inkstand in a London drawing-room. Now, that same spirit of restoration filled the corridors of Sussex Manor. The puzzle had transformed from one of crime to one of care, a testament to human resilience. He lowered his pen, closed the notebook, and gently lifted the crystal paperweight from the table. Under the lamp's warm glow, the facets caught the light like a constellation of hope. Poirot smiled. Even in the deepest night, he knew, seeds of renewal take root in the most unexpected moments. He extinguished the lamp, and with quiet satisfaction, retreated to his bedchamber, ready at last to surrender to sleep. Outside, the wind sighed through the oaks, and Sussex Manor, wrapped in wings of moonlit silence, held its dreams like precious treasures, awaiting the dawn. Chapter 16. Morning of Awakening. A silvery dawn filtered through the tall mullioned windows of Sussex Manor, painting the corridors in pale hues of porcelain and pearl. The morning air carried a crisp promise, and even the ancient oaks outside seemed to stir with renewed expectancy. By 6 o'clock, Lady Ashbourne was already in the conservatory, her soft footsteps echoing on the stone floor as she arranged a ring of cushions around the central fountain for the first guided meditation session. Dr. Eleanor Grant entered, carrying a basket of fresh herbal sachets. "Good morning, Elizabeth," she whispered, placing each sachet beside the cushions. Sprigs of chamomile, mint and lavender tied with silver ribbon. I trust the night's rest was gentle. Lady Ashbourne smiled, smoothing the gathered fabric of her dressing gown. As gentle as one could hope, Eleanor. And now our guests will awaken to a sanctuary of calm, rather than the bustle of the world outside. Dr. Grant knelt to arrange the final cushion. I've prepared a simple script for meditation, to focus on breath, on presence, and on gratitude for the day's new beginnings. I thought we might begin with a brief sound from the singing bowl. Perfect, Lady Ashbourne agreed. I'll signal the guests when they appear in the hall. They rose together and exited through the French doors into the wide corridor, where Colonel Fitzroy waited by the library entrance with a basket of hand-painted mugs filled with warm chamomile tea. Violet Carstairs followed, sketchbook in hand, ready to capture the scene in watercolour. One by one, the women of the retreat emerged, wrapped in shawls or robes, blinking against the morning light. Miss Reeves paused to let the dawn's soft colours wash over her, while Mrs. Clark drew a deep breath of the mint-sweet air. Miss Moore offered a shy nod, cradling her journal like a talisman. "Welcome," Lady Ashbourne said, stepping forward with quiet grace. "Please gather on the cushions, and feel free to sit or recline as most comfortable. Colonel Fitzroy has tea for you, if you wish." The guests arranged themselves around the fountain, the scent of dew and blossoms mingling with the herbal teas Colonel Fitzroy gently helped them pour. As they circled the shallow basin, shimmering ripples caught the first gleam of morning sun. Dr. Grant lifted a bronze singing bowl from the tray beside her. "We begin with presents," she murmured, lightly striking the bowl's rim with the wooden striker. A soft, resonant tone unfolded through the conservatory, settling like a caress on every nerve. "Now," Dr. Grant continued, her voice a gentle murmur beneath the fading resonance, "close your eyes. Feel each breath as it enters, and each breath as it leaves. Allow your thoughts to settle, like leaves floating on a quiet pond. We will hold silence for 3 minutes." Lady Ashbourne and Colonel Fitzroy moved quietly among the seated guests, offering a reassuring smile, or a gentle touch to the shoulder, as Dr. Grant's guidance drifted in cycles of breath and stillness. Violet crouched by the fountain's edge, sketching the scene in swift, fluid lines. The curve of a shoulder, the tilt of a chin, the soft slumber of worry ebbing away. When the 3 minutes had passed, Dr. Grant lightly struck the singing bowl a second time. "Open your eyes gently," she said. "Carry this calm with you into the day. And now, if you wish, share one moment of gratitude, however small." Miss Reeves spoke first. "I am grateful for the stillness, and for the courage to be silent." Her voice trembled in the hush, but she met each listener's gaze with quiet strength. Mrs. Clark followed. "I am grateful for breath. I sometimes forget that simply breathing is a miracle." Her eyes glistened, and she pressed her tea mug to her lips. Miss Moore closed her journal and said softly, "I am grateful for these women, strangers no longer, who remind me that I am not alone." A ripple of warmth spread across the group. Lady Ashbourne and the staff listened, affirming each voice with nods and gentle smiles. Poirot, who had silently joined the gathering by slipping through the open conservatory door, whispered to Lady Ashbourne, "They are finding their strength." Little by little she inclined her head, and our purpose unfolds before us. As the meditation concluded, Lady Ashbourne guided her guests toward the sunroom for a light breakfast of fresh fruit, honeyed yoghurt, and warm bread from the Manor's own ovens. Colonel Fitzroy invited them to seat themselves at the long oak table, where Violet had handwritten place cards with each woman's name, decorated by lupine blossoms and ivy leaves. Over breakfast, conversation blossomed naturally. Miss Reeves and Mrs. Clark discovered a shared love of poetry. Miss Moore spoke of her happiest moments, teaching children under an old elm in London. Dr. Grant offered gentle medical advice. Colonel Fitzroy recounted a humorous anecdote from the stables. Lady Ashbourne and Poirot moved gracefully among the clusters, ensuring no one felt alone, and Violet sketched the candour of each exchange in quick flourishes. By mid-morning, the retreat schedule led the guests to the herb garden, where Dr. Grant conducted a workshop on herbal remedies. She guided them through the process of making simple compresses and poultices from the chamomile and mint grown on the grounds. Lady Ashbourne and Colonel Fitzroy brought trays laden with fresh clippers and linen squares. Violet photographed each step on her sketch pad, intending to illustrate an instruction booklet for future retreats. Miss Clark, whose fingers still trembled, found confidence in crushing mint leaves into a fragrant paste. "I never thought I could do something so useful," she said, laughing in delight when the scent rose to her nose. Miss Reeves, more contemplative, inhaled the steam from a warm poultice on her wrist. "This feels like kindness itself," she murmured, touching the herbal cloth gently to her skin. Miss Moore wrote notes eagerly in her journal. "Herbs for the heart, herbs for the mind," she scribbled, "a garden of solace in every leaf." Her pen danced across the page, as if discovering new terrain. After the workshop, Lady Ashbourne and Dr. Grant led the group to the cloister for journaling time. Comfortable cushions and small writing desks were set beneath climbing roses, and Violet offered prompts she had composed the night before. Describe one moment of hope. Name 3 small joys. Write a letter of forgiveness to yourself. The guests sat in tranquil focus, pens gliding over paper in soft rustles. Poirot, leaning against a column, observed the gentle flow of words. His heart warmed by their collective courage. He exchanged a satisfied glance with Lady Ashbourne. By the time the cloister session ended, the sun had reached its zenith, and Sussex Manor hummed with quiet vitality. The guests reassembled on the terrace for a light luncheon of garden salad, chilled cucumber soup, and elderflower cordial. The very scents and flavours of the retreat distilled into a meal. As they ate, Colonel Fitzroy announced the afternoon's activity. A walk through the orchard at the manor's edge, where guests would gather beneath the apple blossoms to share one intention for the coming week. He invited each woman in turn to speak, and they did so with steady voices and radiant eyes. Dr. Grant and Violet stood at the back, lending quiet support, while Lady Ashbourne and Poirot listened with thoughtful grace, even in this unhurried communion. Poirot's little grey cells marked each subtle shift. The strengthening posture of Miss Reeves, the steady calm of Mrs. Clark, the radiant curiosity of Miss Moore. When the orchard gathering concluded, Lady Ashborne invited her guests to rest or explore as they wished until dinner. Some retired to the library to read, others wandered the rose gardens to sketch flower heads, and a few sought out Colonel Fitzroy in the stables for an introduction to the retired carriage horses. Poirot and Lady Ashborne retreated to the drawing room for a moment's reprieve before the evening's formal dinner. She poured them each a glass of chilled elderflower wine. "They are thriving," she said softly. "I feel their spirits lifting before my eyes." Poirot raised his glass to their awakenings and to the promise that Sussex Manor will continue to guide them gently. He paused, the faintest glint in his eye. "And to the counsel we have yet to offer, in moments both planned and unforeseen." She touched her glass to his. "To every new dawn." As the light waned and the manor prepared for its next gathering, the two friends sat in companionable silence, each mindful that the greatest mysteries lie not in shadows of suspicion, but in the quiet unfolding of human hearts, finding their way back to hope. Chapter 17. The Whispered Confession. Morning glowed soft and pale over Sussex Manor, gilding the dew on rose petals, and resting gently upon the patterned tiles of the entrance hall. Inside, the staff moved with quiet purpose, footmen bearing trays of fresh scones, Mrs. Pender arranging bundles of lavender by each guest's door, and Colonel Fitzroy checking last-minute details of the morning horseback ride. All seemed in order for another day of renewal. Hercule Poirot, however, felt a subtle disturbance in the air, a barely perceptible tremor to the perfect calm. He paused by the great-grandfather clock in the hall, his gaze tracing the elegant pendulum arc. The little grey cells stirred at the memory of one guest's late-night restlessness. He resolved to begin his day, as always, with careful observation. By 7:30, the stables filled with gentle whinnies and the rattle of bridles. The first sunlight glimmered off dew-spangled saddles. Colonel Fitzroy stood by a chestnut mare named Rosalind, offering a soothing pat. Nearby, Miss Reeves stretched to mount a dappled grey gelding, while Miss Clark received assistance from Dr. Grant in securing her riding hat. Miss Moore, undeterred by her earlier anxieties, climbed confidently onto a gentle bay. "Remember," Colonel Fitzroy reminded them, "this is not a test of horsemanship, but an exercise in trust, both in your mount and in yourselves." He smiled encouragingly as each guest nodded. Into this tableau stepped Poirot, cane in hand. He greeted each lady with his customary bow, then turned to Colonel. "May I join the ride today, monsieur?" The Colonel inclined his head. "But, of course, Poirot, I'll reserve Rosalind for you. She has a gentle trot, perfect for observation." He led the mare forward, and Poirot mounted with practised ease. They set off through the dew-wet orchard, horses' hooves cushioned by moss and softened by grass. Violet Carstairs followed on foot, sketchbook clasped, while Lady Ashborne and Dr. Grant trailed with a linen basket of mid-ride refreshments, warm spiced cider and delicate hazelnut biscuits. As they rounded the old stone sundial, Poirot caught sight of a pale slip of paper pinned to the base by a single rose thorn. "You too, Susie," signalled Colonel to halt. The other riders pulled their horses to a standstill, curious. Poirot dismounted and retrieved the paper, turning it over in his gloved hand. The rose's petals had fallen, revealing a message in fine script. "Meet me by the old well at noon. I have something to confess before the day runs away." He frowned slightly. Curious? Lady Ashbourne stepped forward. "A confession? But to whom is it addressed?" Poirot studied the note. No name, yet the writing resembles— He paused, glancing toward Violet. She approached, peering at the handwriting. Violet's eyes widened. "It matches the note I left in the conservatory. Trust only." A hush fell. Colonel Fitzroy exchanged a look with Dr. Grant. Miss Reeves drew a breath. "You mean a guest placed this here?" Poirot nodded. "Someone among us has a secret yet unspoken, one they wish to share at the old well, away from prying eyes." The group fell silent, tension threading the morning calm. Lady Ashbourne cleared her throat. "The old well lies beyond the eastern hedges, near the boundary. Perhaps we should accompany the messenger." Dr. Grant shook her head. "No, a confession should remain private, unless it endangers someone." Colonel Fitzroy dismounted. "I shall go alone, bearing witness. Monsieur Poirot, will you join me?" Poirot returned the note to his pocket and remounted. "With pleasure." The riders, Miss Reeves, Miss Clark, Miss Moore, Violet, and Lady Ashbourne, watched as the two men cantered toward the hedged boundary. Once out of earshot, Violet whispered to Lady Ashbourne, "What if the confession involves one of us?" Ashbourne's brow furrowed. "Then we must be ready to support them." They resumed their stroll toward the orchard edge, carrying cups of cider and the morning's fragile serenity in their hands. At the old well, a moss-covered stone structure, tangled with ivy, Colonel Fitzroy and Poirot dismounted. The well's yew-framed opening lay dark and silent, as though guarding long-buried truths. No one stood nearby. Colonel Fitzroy drew a sharp breath. "Monsieur Poirot, this is most unsettling. Shall I call out?" Poirot shook his head. "Not yet. The sender may wish a private moment." He circled the well's edge, scanning for footprints. The grass was damp, but he noted a set of slender prints leading away toward the woods, and a second set, the heavier tread of two riders, heading back toward the stables. The colonel's face paled. Two riders. Rosalind was at the stables. Who left those? Poirot picked up the slender prints with a measuring stick. "They match Madame's shoes." He nodded toward Lady Ashbourne, whose voice had just drifted faintly on the breeze. She stood at the orchard boundary, consulting Violet's sketchbook. Colonel Fitzroy stifled an exclamation. "She came here. Alone?" "Indeed," Poirot agreed. "And the heavier prints, perhaps mine or yours, from an earlier inspection." He stepped back. "My advice. We await the messenger in the orchard and observe from the hedges." The colonel nodded, uneasy. They returned to the orchard, taking positions behind a row of espaliered apples, where the dappled sunlight lay in patches. "Colonel," Fitzroy glanced at Poirot. "Do you think it could be Dr. Grant?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Dr. Grant merely orchestrates calm. She would not summon confession here. I suspect another heart weighs heavier." Meanwhile, Lady Ashbourne and Violet strolled among the apple trees, oblivious to the men's surveillance. Violet pointed to her sketch of the sundial. "I must finish this before noon. The light is perfect here." Lady Ashbourne nodded. "And I must prepare the well area, should they need comfort after confession. Bring your sketches. I'll hang them in the sitting-room." They turned toward the well, but as they approached the boundary, they noticed Colonel Fitzroy and Poirot emerging from concealment. The sight startled Lady Ashbourne. "Forgive us," Colonel Fitzroy said gravely. "We found this note." He handed it to Lady Ashbourne. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Her own, from the draft of yesterday's stationery motto. She studied Poirot. "You think I wrote this?" Poirot inclined his head. Two telltale signs, the flourish on the M and the spacing of words. "You drafted a similar note last night." Violet gasped. "But why send it here?" Lady Ashbourne's cheeks flushed. I intended to warn someone, to counsel them in private, away from any prying ears. But I never pinned it. I meant to discard the draft." Colonel Fitzroy frowned. "Your confession." Lady Ashbourne closed her eyes briefly. "I feel guilt that my own needs to reclaim trust with Edmund have overshadowed this retreat. I wanted to confess to my guests that, despite outward hospitality, I too wrestle with fear of failure." Violet stepped forward. "Your honesty would inspire them, showing the host is human." Dr. Grant emerged from the nearby path, having overheard their voices. She placed a reassuring hand on Lady Ashbourne's arm. "Your courage to be vulnerable would embolden all here." Poirot watched the gathering, his moustache twitching with approval. "Then let us gather by the well at noon, for your real confession, in front of those you wish to lead." Lady Ashbourne nodded resolute. "Yes, I shall speak from the heart." At the stroke of 12, the guests reconvened by the old well, drawn by the clear toll of the Manor's chapel bell. Colonel Fitzroy stood beside Lady Ashbourne. Violet sketched quietly, and Dr. Grant held a small cluster of wildflowers. Lady Ashbourne stepped forward, voice steady yet soft. "Dear friends, I came here to lead you toward openness and trust, yet I realize I have hidden behind my role as host. In truth, I have feared that my own imperfections would undermine this retreat. I drafted a note, intended for personal confession, asking someone to meet by this well. But I lost courage to express my doubts." She paused, gazing at each woman's face in turn. "Today, I stand before you to confess my own vulnerability, that I sometimes doubt my worthiness to guide you, that I fear I may fail you as you rebuild your lives." A hush filled the clearing. Miss Reeves stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Lady Ashbourne's arm. "Your candour gives us strength." Mrs. Clark added, "We came seeking healing. Your honesty is the first balm." Miss Moore smiled warmly. "We trust you, Lady Ashbourne." Violet set aside her sketchbook. "And I admire your bravery." Dr. Grant handed Lady Ashbourne the wildflowers. "Accept these as tokens of our faith in you." Lady Ashbourne's eyes glistened as they accepted the bouquet. She turned to Colonel Fitzroy, who handed her the crystal memento, the polished inkstand shard. "And this," he said softly, "is proof that broken things and people can be restored." Poirot, standing slightly apart, allowed a small smile. The tremor he sensed had resolved into a wave of solidarity, binding host and guest in mutual trust. As the guests gathered around, Forming a circle of support beneath the ivy-clad well, Lady Ashbourne spoke once more. "Let us move forward together, flawed, yet determined, trusting one another to uphold our shared journey." A chorus of whispered agreements rose, carried on the breeze. At that moment, Sussex Manor glowed not with perfection, but with the warm radiance of human hearts laid bare, and a retreat's true purpose revealed in the whispered confession of its devoted host. Chapter 18. Full Circle at Ashbornne House. Gentle September breeze drifted through the open windows of the drawing-room at Ashbornne House, carrying with it the tang of autumn's first fallen leaves. Outside, the rose trellis still bore a few late blooms, their petals soft as memory against the pale morning light. Inside, Lady Ashbourne moved quietly among her guests, now friends, ensuring each had their luggage packed and their final breakfast served. The air hummed with a tender melancholy. Tomorrow, Sussex Manor would fall silent once again. Hercule Poirot sat at his customary armchair before the hearth, watching the scene with serene satisfaction. His little grey cells had long since solved the riddle of the broken inkstand, pieced together the vanished ledger, and guided a household from suspicion to harmony. Yet he now found equal delight in witnessing the culmination of the retreat he had helped to shape. Each guest, he noted, had grown more radiant with every day spent within these walls. At the long oak table, Miss Eleanor Reeves read aloud Note authoré, last entry in her journal. "I came here with a heart half shattered by loss. Now I leave with roots sprouting anew, nourished by kindness and courage." She closed the leather-bound volume and smiled at Mrs. Josephine Clark, who nodded, her eyes shining. Next to them, Miss Beatrice Moore folded her journal, its pages brimming with hopeful plans. Violet Carstairs stood to her feet, sketchbook in hand, and offered a final watercolour, the rose arbour at dawn, suffused with golden light. Lady Ashbourne rose to address them. "My dear friends, your words and your presence have given this house true life. Each of you has shown that trusting one another can heal the deepest wounds." She paused, her gaze sweeping the assembly. "It is not my role alone that has made this retreat possible, but each of you, your honesty, your courage, your laughter, and even your tears." A hush fell as Colonel Fitzroy stepped forward. "Permit me," he said, "to offer a token of our friendship." He handed each guest a small wooden box engraved with the Ashbourne crest. Inside lay a polished crystal fragment, the final remnant of Lord Ashbourne's inkstand, restored and gleaming like a promise fulfilled. Miss Reeves ran her fingers over the crystal's smooth facets. "A reminder," she whispered, "that broken things may be made whole again." Mrs. Clark pressed the box to her heart, "and that we need not bear our burdens alone." Miss Moore turned to Violet. "Thank you for capturing our memories in your art." She lifted Violet's dawn painting into the light. "I shall hang this in my new home as a celebration of beginnings." Violet blushed, tucking the painting under her arm. "Your stories gave me more inspiration than any muse." Dr. Grant, who had borne witness to both the physical and emotional transformations, stepped to Lady Ashbourne's side. "Your vision has borne fruit, Elizabeth. May you always find such fulfilment in bringing light to others." Lady Ashbourne inclined her head, tears of gratitude glistening. I could not have done this without each of you, and without our ever-patient detective. All eyes turned to Poirot, who gave a slight bow. Madame, it has been my greatest privilege. Here I observed a most delightful puzzle, not of crime, but of hearts in need of mending. Your compassion and determination have revealed that the greatest mysteries are those we solve together. He rose and paced slowly before the hearth, steepling his fingers. Allow me one final reflection. An object, be it an inkstand, a ledger, or a heart, cannot fulfill its purpose when shattered. Yet, with patience, kindness, and the courage to seek truth, even the most broken things can be set right. You, dear friends, have proven that the human spirit, like crystal, has both fragility and resilience. A warm murmur of agreement rippled around the room. In that moment, every guest felt the weight of their own transformation. Fear transmuted into hope, isolation into fellowship, doubt into trust. Lady Ashbourne guided her guests towards the veranda. For their departure, the morning sun now shone fully, gilding the hedges and roses in a soft glow. A carriage awaited, and the footman stood ready to lift trunks and valises. Miss Reeves embraced Lady Ashbourne. "Thank you for giving me back my life." Mrs. Clark kissed her hand. "You have rescued me, body and soul." Miss Moore clasped Lady Ashbourne's shoulders. "I leave with courage and the certainty that kindness endures." Violet distributed final hugs, promising to visit and to send more sketches. Dr. Grant offered professional advice and heartfelt best wishes before boarding the carriage. Colonel Fitzroy escorted the group, ensuring no detail was overlooked. When the carriage wheels turned on the drive, Lady Ashbourne paused at the gate and watched it vanish around the bend. She exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd held, her heart full of both joy and a quiet ache. Poirot joined her, cane in hand. They travel onward, enriched by this experience, and Sussex Manor returns to its peaceful slumber, until next it opens its doors. Lady Ashbourne nodded. "I am grateful, but I admit I feel a touch of loneliness now that the house is empty." "Madame," Poirot said gently, "the house will never be truly empty. Every smile, every whispered confession, every act of compassion has left its echo here. When the roses bloom next spring, they will carry the memory of your guests' courage." She smiled at the prospect. "Then I shall care for these gardens with renewed purpose." Poirot's moustache quivered, "And I shall depart for my next case, comforted by knowing that here the puzzle of trust has been solved." They entered the house together, passing through the drawing-room one last time. There, upon the mantelpiece, Lady Ashbourne placed the final crystal shard beside the original inkstand, now whole once more. She adjusted the silver frame that surrounded Poirot's signed report, hung with pride above the hearth. At her side, Poirot surveyed the room, each piece of furniture polished, each cushion plumped, each painting gleaming in the morning light. The air felt charged with promise, as though the walls themselves breathed a contented sigh. He turned to Lady Ashbourne and offered his arm. "Madame, may I escort you to the garden? Just one final stroll." She took his arm, and together they passed through the French doors onto the terrace. The rose arbour overhead was streaked with sunbeams, its last blossoms nodding in gentle approval. Below, the sundial cast a crisp shadow, marking the hour of new beginnings. They walked along the pebbled path toward the fountain, where a small plaque lay at the oak sapling's base. Seeds of Renewal. Planted May 22nd, 1927. In quiet reflection, seeds take root. Lady Ashborne bent to read the inscription. A perfect reminder. Poirot smiled. May each visitor who reads it recall both their own growth and your unwavering kindness. She stood and faced him. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for your wisdom, your patience, and your friendship. He inclined his head, modest yet proud. I am but a humble servant of the truth, madame. And here the truth has been most beautiful. They lingered a moment in companionable silence, the afternoon sun warm upon their shoulders. Then Poirot touched the brim of his hat. I must away now, for other mysteries await. But I carry Sussex Manor and its restored hearts with me always. Ashborne offered her hand. He took it, pressing it gently. Goodbye, Hercule Poirot. May your journeys be ever guided by grace. He bowed once more. Au revoir, Lady Ashborne, until our paths cross again. With that, he stepped back, his little frame framed by the rose-laden arbour. He tipped his hat and turned toward the winding drive, his cane clicking on the stone path. As he walked away, Lady Ashborne watched until he vanished beyond the gate, a slender figure moving into the bright expanse of the world and toward new adventures. Behind her, Sussex Manor stood in tranquil dignity, its windows luminous with memory, its gardens whispering with the promise of tomorrow. Within its walls, the puzzles of broken inkstands and hidden ledgers had given way to a grander truth, that with trust, compassion, and the courage to confess, even the most fragile hearts can find their way home.